Anyway, I'm just doing the same thing. Mine's blank. Now. I pushed the button.
Okay. All right. Well, we are still broadcasting. So good evening to the public and welcome to this meeting of the Sequoia Union High School District Board of Trustees. This is our first in-person meeting since the shelter-in-place orders went out early in the pandemic. And we look forward to having the public join us more and more all the time in the future. But we are continuing to broadcast now out to Zoom. And those members of the audience who wish to make comments can do so by raising their Zoom hands. We will be adjourning to close session until 6 p.m. when the open session will resume. So if there are any members of the audience at this time who have comments they would like to make on items that are agendized for closed session, can raise their Zoom hands at this moment to make those comments. And seeing none, then we will adjourn to a closed session and we will resume our open session here at 6 o'clock. All right, we welcome everybody to this meeting of the Sequoia Union High School District Board of Trustees. And let me say it is with great enthusiasm that we welcome some physical bodies into our boardroom for the first time in almost 2 years. It is tremendous to have members of the public and our staff back. And we are also taking our first experimental step with a new technological approach. So we are back in person. We do have members of the public here in person with us. We are streaming out to an audience over Zoom for the first time. And we are accepting public comment in from not only the members here, but from our remote audience. Also, new technology that board members are using. Some of us do have our own laptops up so that we can be kind of seeing what's going on Zoom, although we are not actively participating in that. And we can manage our own copy of the agenda and scroll up and down and see what's going on. As people up here, we want to be sure that we have both our Zoom input muted and our speaker muted on our laptops so that we're not contributing any feedback or echoes or things. And we will probably have some interesting times as we make mistakes and learn things. We're also now for the first time using the microphones in front of us at the dais. We have a little button that lights up red when an individual board member or other member of staff needs to speak. The rest of us want to leave our microphones off except when it's our turn. We will also become better at that skill over time as we begin practicing it now. And we're also going to be going to things like raising our own hands and nodding and winking at each other and other kinds of ways of communicating and making sure everybody is included the right way. So it's a very different experience from what we've done for the past year and a half plus, but it is very similar to the way the world worked for many of us for many, many years before that. And we welcome this return to some bit of normal.
I may have a problem there because the microphone is here, but we'll see. You succeeded in getting yourself off the window. I will speak up then. Thank you.
Okay. So let me go through the protocol since it is new this time. We are reconvening the public. Item number 3 in the public protocol says that members of the public may submit comments for the board in advance of the meeting via email at board@seek.org. All comments sent in advance of the meeting will be shared with the board prior to the meeting, but will not be read during the board meeting. So this is a change to the way we have been doing correspondence. We're making sure that everybody gets it, but we're not going to go through and kind of present it to the public. One of the things that we heard back from some members of the public was that comments that they had emailed to board members were not intended to be broadcast in public, and they felt that that was a little bit inappropriate for what had been done. So we will go ahead. We will be making sure that the board sees it all. Members of the public who wish to remotely provide comment during the meeting will use the raise hand feature, and that's why board members are monitoring the Zoom session. To raise your hand on PC or Mac, desktop or laptop, click the button labeled raise hand at the bottom of the window, and you will lower your hand by clicking the same button, which will then be renamed lower hand. On a mobile device, you tap raise hand at the bottom left corner of the screen. The hand icon will turn to blue. The text below will say lower hand when you use it again later. When you're participating on a landline, press *9 to raise your hand. Speakers want to raise their hand during agenda item 11.1, the public comment portion of the meeting, in order to comment on topics that are not included in the approved agenda. To comment on specific agenda items, speakers must use the raise hand feature immediately preceding that agenda item they wish to comment on. Once your hand is raised, please wait to be acknowledged. The board president, with the assistance of the meeting facilitator, will call on speakers. When called upon, speakers will be unmuted and the timer will be presented. Okay. Members of the public who wish to provide comment in person at the meeting must do the following. And everybody who's in here has already done this. Any others who arrive later on will also be able to do this. Provide proof of vaccination or a negative result taken within the previous 3 days. And we ask people please arrive early just in case it takes any time to go through that. As an alternative, to make sure that we're not excluding anybody, rapid antigen testings will be available for meeting attendees who do not provide either verification of vaccination or documented test results. But that will take 20 minutes or so to get your negative result. And so please plan to be able to wait while that goes on. And all of this is our very strong intention to be as inclusive as possible while being safe. And be sure to wear a well-fitting mask that covers both nose and mouth without gaps while in the building. And maintain physical distancing from anybody not part of your household when you come in. Okay, speaking to issues not on the agenda in person, to speak to an item that is not on the agenda, please fill out a speaker card, which can be found, I believe, over on that table there. And hand it to actually the superintendent's administration, Ms. Loise, who will bring it around. Speakers addressing an item that is not on the agenda will be called during agenda item 11.1, public comment. Speaking to a specific agenda item, same card, please fill it in and specify which agenda item number it is for, and hand that in as well, and they will all come to the board president to call you up. Okay. As a reminder, the board does not act upon any matter that has not been agendized, except under limited circumstances as permitted by law. It is the policy of the board to refer matters raised in this forum to staff for investigation and/or action where appropriate. Please note that each speaker is limited to 3 minutes and any topic is customarily limited to 10 minutes. Board's executive assistant will keep the time and advise the speakers when there are 30 seconds left, and again when time is up. If there are a large number of speakers for any topic, the board will consider whether to adjust the time in order to allow more people to speak. Okay, so much for that bit of housekeeping. And it won't be all brand new every time as we go forward, and we won't be as long-winded about it. But we do want to make sure everybody is comfortable or at least familiar with how we're doing it as we move into the new world of the old and familiar. Can we now have a roll call, please?
Student trustee Stead,
Here.
trustee Thompson,
Here.
trustee Stevenson,
Here.
trustee Ginn,
Here.
vice president Dubois,
Here.
president Sarver.
Here.
The quorum is present.
Okay, we move on to approval of the agenda. And there was one suggestion for a movement of item 15.2, the approval of contracts with University of Southern California Race and Equity Center up. We do have guests from out of town who are here in support of that. Was that? No, it was 50, excuse me. Okay, 15.1 and 15.2. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Superintendent has got it all figured out here. All right. So we would like to move those ahead of our information items and do those immediately. So 15.1, 2, and 3 before 12.1. So if that is suitable, I'll accept a motion for approving the agenda.
I'll move.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay, the agenda as amended has been improved and approved. All right. All right, that moves us to item 6, our report out on closed session. In closed session this evening, no actions were taken. And that moves us along to approval of the consent agenda. And the board action is always to approve the items taken simultaneously with one motion, which is not debatable and requires a unanimous roll call vote for passage. The action indicated on each item is deemed to have been considered in full and action taken as worded therein. Only members of the board or the superintendent may remove items from the consent agenda. Members of the public may provide comments at the start of the consent agenda item, which may convince a board member or the superintendent to remove an item for further discussion. The motion would be to waive the reading of the consent agenda, accept the reports, adopt the resolutions, and approve other items. Do we have any actions from any board members, the superintendent, or any, well, let me start. Are there any comments from the public wishing to remove items from the consent agenda for discussion? I do not see any hands up on Zoom. We have not received any cards. If no board members have any. Okay. All right. If no board members have any items that they wish to withdraw, we'll accept a motion for approval.
I move to approve. I second.
Okay, Carrie got in the movement and Shani snuck in with the second. And this is done by a roll call, please.
Student trustee Stead,
Yes.
trustee Thompson,
Yes.
trustee Stevenson,
Yes.
trustee Ginn, vice president Dubois,
Yes.
president Sarver.
Yes,
Motion carried 5-0.
thank you. All right, this always brings us along to our favorite part of the evening, the superintendent's recognitions.
Good evening, everyone. And so once again, it is an honor to be able to acknowledge and to lift the wonderful work that goes on throughout our district. We are especially excited because the work that you all have done in commitment to students, it only makes us better. And it only proves that while even in a pandemic, that we're doing the best and we're giving our best every day. And so it is always a pleasure to acknowledge the good deeds and work and actions of our staff, community, and our students. For our first recognition, I am going to yield to Dr. Schimmel, our interim assistant superintendent of human resources, and he will make that presentation for our first recognition. So Dr. Schimmel.
As many of you know, we had a retirement in the Human Resources Department of Assistant Superintendent effective July 31st. And I did not come on board till August 28th. So we'd like to take recognition tonight and recognize all the people in human resources that kept the department running for almost a month. It was a little more difficult this year because we had teachers returning and classified people returning. And public law requires several things: mandated trainings, fingerprinting, the whole employment process. And that ran very, very smoothly because with COVID, we had a few more people change jobs, new jobs, and to get everybody in place for an August 11th opening was quite a task. And I will say, I have never met a more competent group of 6 people. The whole department is 6 people. And they came together and they first met me in August and really helped me focus on what needed to be done. So I was able to provide support to them to do their jobs, and they did it really well. And Tony DeChico, which we affectionately refer to as our team mom, kept all of us in line in communicating with each other. So all of the things like vector training that was mandated, and particularly with our frontline computer evaluation system, we had several people, and I'll point out just one, but there were many. Katrina Grant, who does all of our substitute calling and hiring, stepped up and with her computer skills helped us put forms and items on board so that our teachers and principals could use those forms. And along with her own task based on COVID, as you'll see later on in some reports, this has been a challenge for all school districts to hire substitutes and have them here. Part of it has to do with financials. Part of it has to do with there just are not a girth. A lot of baby boomers are retiring, and yet more students are coming back to school. So we'd like to thank all of the departments, but in particular this Human Resources Department of just 6 people that made school start, kept things going, and had to transition from one assistant superintendent to a new one, and will soon be transitioning to another one. But had your interest to your students and all the people interests that have to take place up front and foremost, and we're very fortunate and thank them.
All right, well, we thank you for that, and we do indeed very much appreciate the extraordinary work that has been done. As you indicate, a very small staff has a very large responsibility in not only a time of greater challenge than ever before, and this transition back to normal, which has meant maintaining all of the extraordinary conditions that we have been under while reincorporating all of the experience we have been used to, and finding a way to move all of it forward safely with a whole new range of challenges. But also that has been done in a period of leadership transition. And for a good chunk of the time, with a gap in the leadership we've been used to. So it is a testament to this extraordinary effort, hard work that we have seen the smooth operations of our district and the quality benefits that we have been able to deliver to our students as this school year has started. So my thanks to Katerina and the whole team.
Thank you. And thank you. And my gratitude is extended to the Human Resources Division. And thank you for serving as our interim through this process as well, Dr. Shimon. In addition, we always like to recognize the great work that our school community is doing to connect our partners and to make sure that we have relationships with our community members. And so tonight, we have a recognition of one of our schools, Redwood High School, where students who attend Redwood come from all over our district boundaries. And Redwood has been exemplary in establishing strong relationships with various organizations to support student success. Some of those partnerships include, but are not limited to, the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula, Live in Peace, San Mateo County Office of Education, Whole Foods, San Carlos Community Foundation, Acknowledge Alliance, Each Green Corner, Vegan Outreach, Stanford, Hidden Villa, Jasper Ridge, Sims Meadow. And for the past year and a half, Redwood High School staff members have been working with numerous community organizations to support families through the pandemic. This support included rent relief, housing, food, and gift cards. Through Redwood's community partnerships, they were able to supply much needed food boxes to those facing a need during our pandemic. On top of that, Redwood also focuses on supporting its community through the revitalization of their large garden area located in the back of their school. Through a variety of grants received, they are establishing a food forest as well as an environmental center, including outdoor teaching space. And for that, we are extremely proud. I would like to recognize and present a certificate of recognition to Redwood High School for your leadership in cultivating and expanding community partnership, which is one of our goals as a governance team and as your superintendent as well in our entry plan, the partnership to support student success and also at Redwood High School. Principal Ogden, please come forward.
Thank you for all your support. You guys have always supported Redwood. It's amazing. We're very, very grateful to you and to all of you. So thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. There is a consistent theme that we see of going above and beyond and doing more in these critical times. And Redwood and the work that's been recognized is another tremendous example of that. But I think beyond that, what's really special here that we talked about is the kinds of community outreach, both into generating new partnerships that are increasingly beneficial to our students and bringing in some of the tremendous community resources that are out there for whom we're so grateful, and also in providing services and opportunity to the surrounding community, all of which helps embed our students in a more authentic, real-world experience that does so much strengthen their outcomes. So this is excellent work that's being done and couldn't be more appreciated. Thank you. All right, now we move on to our student trustee comments. And I know that student trustee Osunya is not here currently, has, I believe, a conflicting rehearsal going on or practice of some sort. So we will turn to student trustee Steed.
Thank you. I am so happy that board meetings are back to being in person so that we can better communicate and share with our community. The Student Advisory Committee met yesterday to great success, and we discussed what we want to focus on this year and what was going well within each site. Feedback we received from this meeting was that students really want to thank their teachers for working so hard and for caring so much about not only our education, but also our well-being. Moreover, students wanted to give a shout out to certain programs which do so much for our students, such as SOS at Woodside and the entirety of the middle college program at Kenyatta. Students are also very happy to be having more normal after school activities. This week, the whole focus is on homecoming. And finally, however, students do have many complaints about bathrooms being locked continuously around campuses. It is understandable that this is being done to avoid kids skipping class and to fight vandalism, but it really is harming students, especially when there are so few bathrooms at these schools to begin with. Someone did the math, and apparently at Woodside one day it was like 153 students per one stall of the open bathrooms. And so this is obviously not great for our students. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we move on next to comments from the Sequoia District Teachers Association. And Edith, we welcome you to the podium.
To be the very first person to speak at the podium. I'm so excited. Well, very first person in a while. First, I wanted to thank the board for their action on the consent agenda, because it gives me the opportunity to say congratulations to the 49 members of the SDTA bargaining unit who are now officially permanent employees under the California Education Code. These are employees who, many of them, started in our district in the 1920 school year, had to scramble in March to make that transition, and then had to work through very trying circumstances last year, all while knowing that their future with the district was being judged in that uncertain time. So it is a big accomplishment for them, and we are very pleased that that action was taken. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate Renee Alvarez and Chris Chapoister, who were recently elected as the new president and vice president of AFSCME in our district. We're excited for them as well. We're looking forward to bargaining tomorrow. We've had one session, a morning session a few weeks ago, and we go into our first full day session tomorrow. And then I have another two topics that some of our members asked me to share with you. One has already been alluded to by our interim assistant superintendent, and that is the impact of sub shortage. It's being felt everywhere across the district. We have many anecdotal stories of pleas for teachers to cover classes and others to cover classes. Mentioned at the last meeting that some of our administrators in special ed got themselves in the pool to help out. And we had some shortages there. You'll see them later, and you can keep that image in your mind. But one of our reps put together some sort of back of the envelope data from September in Menlo Atherton. There were of the many, many thousands of teaching periods that month, there were 715 periods in which classes needed substitutes. 149 of those were not covered. No, 159 of those were not covered by a substitute. That's 22% of the need. 139 of those were covered by our bargaining unit members. So 19.5%. And the other 2.8%, 20 of those periods had to be covered by the site administrators. That means those site administrators weren't available to do anything else during the periods that they were subbing. We know that it is a dire situation when the administration has to step in. And our members are asking when we're going to see the need for the district office administrators who also have credentials to step in and help. We know there's no easy fix for this. We know every district is going through it, but as this is being broadcast and we have people at home, I wanted to make sure people are hearing that, because when we don't have a substitute, when another teacher has to cover, when classes are combined so that they can work with one substitute, students often don't get the lesson that was planned. We have a situation where the photography teacher had to be out due to illness. She left a lesson that included work on the computers. There was no substitute for the period. The students were brought to the library to be supervised by the librarian media teacher. And the software wasn't available on the computers in the library. So the students had a study period rather than being able to complete the work their teacher had left for them. It's important that we know the impact it's having. And we know that teachers who for decades, for centuries, have come to school sick in order to prevent that impact, don't have that, that I would say luxury, don't have that ability this year, because if you have any symptoms, you have to stay home because you don't want to get anyone sick. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that this time was being timed. The other item that I was asked to share was about the situation we are facing at 2 of our sites with English language learner newcomers. These data points come from Sequoia High School, where we've had 44 new students join our school since August. 10 more are incoming at the moment. 54 students is 2 full teachers worth of students, but we haven't hired 2 new teachers for those students. They are coming to us from more rural, less formally educated areas with higher academic needs, much more difficult to fulfill. While we have wanted, obviously, to provide all of the social and emotional services that all of our students deserve, just providing the academics for these students is incredibly challenging because of their varied levels, their varied languages, and their comfort level in the classroom. So we're hoping that the district can see their way to providing us with more teachers and more aides for those students at all of the sites that are impacted, if and when we can find them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe there are plans to talk to some of those points a little bit later on this evening. So excellent, excellent preparation and lead in. Thank you. And do we have comments from the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees this evening? Is that someone present from the group? I know we have new leadership that is coming in, but okay. Hopefully in the next meeting. All right. Then that brings us along to public comment. And public comment is a period for speakers wishing to address the board on matters not on the agenda. And we spoke about using the raise hand feature for those who are on Zoom to provide comments. And also members of the public who are here and wish to provide comment can put in a card. And we do have one card that has come in from our present public, and that is from David Stoller.
Hi, greetings to the board. I've never been in a meeting like this, so this is a new experience entirely. So it's basically something I wanted to ask a question. So my child goes to Sequoia, and I read Superintendent Williams' plan for the district, and so I just had a question really that just came up. So I did notice that the word equity appears quite frequently in the plan, and then I also noticed that one of the action items or the goals is to define the word equity. So it seemed a little bit like essentially, and that word equity can mean different things to so many different people. So I first wanted to start with honestly just a question. What does equity mean at this point? It's like, it feels like it's such an important part of that plan. And I know that there's equity of outcome that's being discussed, and there's also equality of opportunity. And I honestly just, since it's sort of a new thing, and everyone, when you hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, everyone just nods their head. But for me, I was like, well, actually, I'm not quite sure I understand what that means. So that is why I'm here, to just simply ask that question, if at the moment there's a way to define what you think equity means and how you might go about achieving equity, if I have that phrasing right. So that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, that question is well noted. And is part of the ongoing communication that the district is working on. So we won't stop for a discussion of that right now, but it will continue to be a topic of much discussion. I want to look, I believe. We have two participant hands up for comment. The first is Abby Corman, and the second is Susie Cho.
Hi, my name is Abby Corman. I'm a teacher at Menlo Atherton. My public comment today is again about public comment. I'm still lack some clarity around, as our procedures change, what our expectation and hope is around having our public comment at board meetings. I am a little confused. I guess I could say happy that we're back in person, but still have the Zoom option for board meetings. It was something I had asked about at our last board meeting, and it seems like the decision was made during a study session when I thought no decisions could be made. I know we got an email, which I very much appreciate, explaining this policy, but I'm still unclear around how to write board comments, public comment to the board in advance if you're unable to be here. And I'm also wanting to just flag for the team moving forward. I know this is our first time. The only person I've been able to see through Zoom speak, besides board members, has been Edith. I even missed Principal Ogden accepting the award on behalf of Redwood. And so as a community member, I'm a stakeholder, a voter. not just a teacher, in this community. I'm hoping more and we maintain and maybe even increase our public engagement at board meetings because they're so important. And so I'm hoping to just highlight this for the board as we talk around engaging the community. There's still a lack of clarity around how to give public comment. If you send an email to the board, will it automatically be shared out as it was in the past? How can I participate from home and still see the people? So I'm just trying to flag these things in the hopes of having more voices speaking up at board meetings in the future, which I know is the goal of the board. I have heard you name that, and I'm so appreciative that we still have Zoom. I'm glad that decision was included in that study session decision that was made. And I'm just hoping to flag this again and hope that there's more clarity, not just in emails, also on our website. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to throw back a couple of comments. One of which is that apparently we were successful enough with the sharing out the information about public comment that we were able to receive that last public comment. And we have been successful enough in sharing out information about how to attend the meeting in person or through Zoom to have had both of the last two participants from each camp. As I did say earlier, this is the first iteration of trying to go in the direction of bringing back the convenience and the immediacy of our pre-pandemic board meetings, as well as sharing the greater convenience and the greater engagement that we've seen through some of the things that worked during the pandemic period. And we're going forward trying to bring out the best of both worlds. So we do definitely anticipate that we will both through experience and feedback have opportunities to continue improving the experience. We do appreciate every bit of feedback we can get toward doing that. So thank you for that. Our next comment is from Susie Cho.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to hear my comment. It's great to see you all back together in person, even if I'm still staring at you from my computer screen. My name is Susie Cho, and I've been an English teacher at Menlo Atherton for 11 years. And I learned last week that the position of Assistant Superintendent of HR was split into two positions, one as the Assistant Superintendent of HR and one as the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. This is in addition to a number of other district positions that have been added in the past 4 to 5 years, including director and coordinator positions in special education, CTE, EL, and technology. I appreciate that these other district positions were added as I have benefited from trainings, PD sessions, and program reviews that were made possible with these additional staff members. However, while the necessity for these district level positions is great, we also have very pressing needs at our school sites that must be addressed. In returning to in-person instruction, addressing the needs of students at our sites has been more acute than in past years. For example, in August, I requested a routine vision test for a student who said he could not read the screen of the Chromebook on his desk in front of him. In previous years, this test was done within a week or two. This year, through absolutely no fault of her own, the district nurse could not perform this test until last week, 6 weeks after my initial request. Our nurse is currently supporting 2 sites with a caseload of more than 4,000 students, and this year she has the added responsibility of managing COVID cases. Moreover, with the lasting impact of COVID and in light of the sub shortage that many people have already talked about today, teachers are asked multiple times each day to cover additional classes rather than prepare lessons for their own classes, and this does include site administrators who are subbing almost daily. And all staff members are pulling extra duty as campus aides and support staff as we manage student behaviors and student mental health in returning from the pandemic. As we are adding additional personnel to the SUHSD staff, I'd just like to stress the necessity for more direct student-facing support at the site level, such as additional mental health specialists, additional campus aides, or a dedicated nurse for each site. We must work to further support students where they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are all of the hands we had up and the comment cards that we had. Okay, I would like to go back to hang on a second, to an item that I gave short shrift to earlier. Because my report out from closed session was incomplete, and the point was just raised here a moment ago. So I do want to complete what was done there. There were actually 2 actions that I need to report out on. In closed session, the Board of Education took action to offer employment to Dr. Dwayne Davis as Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, effective October 28th, 2021. Dr. Davis's management employment offer will be presented at our next board meeting as an action item in open session on October 27th. Also in closed session, the Board of Education took action to offer employment to Dr. Elizabeth Chacon as Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, effective October 28th, 2021. Dr. Chacon's management employment offer will be presented at our next board meeting as an action item in open session on October 27th, 2021. All right, let me return now to our regularly scheduled agenda. And we have moved our first 3 action items up ahead of the information items. So our first one will be action item 15.1, adoption of resolution number 1699, commitment to equity, inclusion, and diversity at Sequoia Union High School District. Great opportunity to amplify greatly on some of our public comment and many other things.
Good evening again. It is again a privilege to stand before you and to co-sponsor this resolution for committing to equity, inclusion, and diversity at Sequoia Union High School District, where excellence is our baseline through leadership, service, and equity. I am proud to say that I am co-sponsoring this initiative, and I would ask that Ms. Henderson, if you would come forward as well. And Ms. Ortiz as well. Okay. And so we're going to present to you, and I think it's going to address a question briefly that was posed earlier, and we thank you for your question. When we look at the notion of equity, it could mean a lot of things, but at its foundation, what it means is providing everyone an opportunity to have access, and also for them to be able to engage in opportunities that are specific to their needs. So for example, I know we're all familiar most likely with the image of a bike. If I were to give each and every one of you the same bike at the same height, then that may not necessarily meet your need. However, if I considered your height, considered those things in terms of your experience, consider also just the length, you know, I think of my feet, and I may have a little extra after COVID. And so I would consider that. I would want to customize a bike that will fit and suit your needs, so that I would guarantee that you, or give you the opportunity to reach success in your cycling as much as possible, as opposed to just giving you a standard bike where it may or may not suit your needs, or also just fits the requirements and uniqueness and nuances of your physical makeup. And so as we think about equity in Sequoia Union High School District, it is our opportunity to have a collective definition as we advance this work. It would not be of support for me to come in and say, this is what equity is. One, in my entry plan, the question was posed, how are we ready or are we ready for equity? And so in order to respect what has been done and the great work that has been done around equity, what our intentions are is to define equity together. And so that we all understand the pathway and we all understand how we are going to continue to advance equity in a way that is going to not only acknowledge, but honor the multiple voices that we have through our families, through our staff members, and most importantly, for our students. And so discussing race, equity, and inclusion and injustice openly can lead to very tough questions. One of which is, what does that mean? Why is that important? Why are we focusing on equity? And topics that may not so clearly be resolved in just one conversation. Yet we had educators last year during one of the most trying times when we were confronted with a twindemic. We had a racial reckoning, also followed by a pandemic that many of us have never ever experienced in our existence. But yet and still, because of the leadership and the commitment and the courage of a group of folk, members within our Sequoia Union High School district, had come together with a vision and said, we will not accept it anymore. We want to feel not only included, but we want to be heard. We have a voice, we have a perspective, and we want to make sure that not only staff members, but every student within our community has that same platform for voice, perspective, and also contributions. And so I just want to say that I commend each and every one of those individuals, our colleagues who served on the Equity and Diversity Committee, because they have created this platform for staff to share their experiences and discuss these very difficult topics around what is the social construct around race, how has culture and racial identity influenced us as educators and learners, what is privilege and power through a historical and critical lens, and then what are policy and practices that perpetuate inequity and beliefs and values that prevent some of our students, some of our staff members from thriving and moving forward. So I thank them again for having the courage. And as a result, we are no longer the same individuals who once walked these campuses back in March 2019, 2020 rather. While we may not all have a clear understanding right now around issues of race and equity within our district, we are in a time and space that has allowed us to unravel the truth about racial justice and injustice, so it becomes the very fabric of every policy and practice and point for our district. So with that, I want to bring the attention to, if you can change the slide, please, our vision. So our vision as a district is to lead Sequoia Union High School District in becoming a national and international beacon of equity and excellence. And equity meaning that we make sure that we give and we provide spaces for all students and staff to be serviced, to thrive, to advance according to their needs in order to better support our students. And that stands as the first choice for all families and communities within our school district boundaries. In addition, our district-wide equity goal statement from our governance team. And I want to say that our governance team has really rolled up their sleeves and continued to engage in the conversations around equity. And what does that mean from a leadership point? And what does that mean as they continue to give direction to the district? And so the district recognizes that equity requires strategic and sustainable action to meet the needs of every student and employee. We commit to design and implement structures, systems, and policies that achieve equity, making sure that we provide customized, nuanced support to ensure the success of every staff member and student community member within our family, to achieve equity in our instructional, institutional, and employment practices. So the necessary conversation, Benita Mayfield reminds us that conversation on race or racism are seldom easy, but they are absolutely necessary to address the disparities in education. And with that, I am going to yield to Ms. Henderson, who will continue the conversation. But before I do so, I ask that we give her a big round of applause. She and Pablo Aguilar, who again, in a very bold time, took the steps to open this conversation and to hold us accountable as a governance team and as a community to make sure that we know that everyone in our district has a presence and they also are valued and they also have a worthy contribution to the success of this district. And so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And to continue with your analogy about using the bike, in terms of having these conversations about race and doing this equity work, some of us still need training wheels. Some of us are still riding on sidewalks, and others of us are ready to compete in the Olympics. And so with that, those of us ready to compete in the Olympics, and we, as Dr. Bettina Love says, we need to do more than just survive. And many BIPOC staff reached a point where we weren't surviving. And we created a call to action to, again, push this district in the right direction to address some of the inequities that exist for not only students, but also for staff. So with that, the design team, and we are truly doing hybrid presentations. So Pablo as well is, he's on Zoom. So we are going to like tag team a little bit, and we've got members of the design team here. So again, I am Taja Henderson, and Glenda Ortez Galan is here as well, and Pablo's in our Zoom sphere somewhere. So to continue, the design team, along with Elisa Nosadal and Amy Hansen, we collectively represent Sequoia High School, Menlo Atherton, East Palo Alto Academy, and Woodside. So it wasn't just a few of us. We made sure that we collectively brought in sites across the district in order to work on setting some ideas and goals and questions around what policies and practices are continually holding back students and staff. We focused on looking at curriculum and instruction. We definitely focused on staffing because we have an underrepresentation of BIPOC staff and administration at all levels. If you just even look around this room, it is evident while we are here at this board meeting of where the underrepresentation exists. And we challenge the district to figure out some solutions, to do some things differently. And I believe even from hearing those two hires for the assistant superintendents, that we are starting to do things differently in this district, so we can take off those training wheels and start moving faster with this work. So I'm just going to share the vision for the EDC, and then I'm going to pass it along. So we, again, are centering equity and social justice in our work. We wanted to look again at the policies and practices that reproduce inequities that happen for our students. All you have to do is look at the data and it's there. And you can see how BIPOC students are underperforming basically at all levels across this district. So there definitely are some systems and practices that we need to challenge and question. And with that, I am going to pass it on. Hi, Pablo. Good to see you. Yes. Pablo, I believe you have the next piece.
Yeah, can you all hear me just fine? Hopefully everyone can hear me. So I'm
Yes,
talking about,
indeed.
okay, you can hear me. Thank you. So my name is Pablo Aguilera. I'm also a teacher at Sequoia. So thank you very much, Tasha, for introducing me. I apologize for not being there in person. I'm simultaneously taking care of a little baby infant. So some of the findings that we found in the past while we started this, but also in the past year that we've been doing this Equity and Diversity Council, is that we found out that we had capitalized on this critical moment to challenge policies and practices that reproduce academic disparities that exist within our district. However, we want to make sure that this work is ongoing. It doesn't just end when we reach one goal, it's ongoing. So therefore, we ask for the school board, the district, all school sites to make a commitment to continue the EDC's vision of equity and diversity, because we can't just stop and say, good job, pat ourselves on the back. We need to make sure that we continue because there's always new challenges. Furthermore, we discovered that the district office and school sites did not necessarily have the systems and still do not have the systems for true equity for all students in our district. And that is embedded in the frameworks and foundations of our schools. I mean, we have one example that Edith mentioned with the English learners and newcomers that are coming and making sure that they have not just academic services, but also we have a lot of mental health obstacles that are coming our way with students in detention centers and all that. So all this needs to be taken into consideration. On top of that, we have the continued work that was being done in regards to racial equity, like at our school sites, was being done on the fringes. And most of this was by classified and certificated staff and primarily by BIPOC staff. That was how it was done for many, many years, decades. And what happened was the BIPOC staff were carrying the burden of challenging these inequitable systems because the challenge wasn't embedded in changing the systems and the framework and all of that. So on top of that, we also realized that in the past year, we've tried to create this group and we're trying to get it going, not just at district level, but also at different school sites. And we saw that at some school sites, we did have some resistance, kind of like what we see in the general public to this work. And we had staff equity groups doing this work to change systems and policies, but they were actively being disrupted and dismantled, even at some of our school sites. So there's a lot of things that we found which shows the emphasis and the need as to why we really, really need to make sure we keep this going and work collaboratively to do this and take a really deep look at our systems. So now I'm going to pass it over to colleague Glenda, who's going to tell us about some recommendations.
Hi, good evening. Buenas tardes. I'm Glenda Ortez Galan. I'm the head counselor at EPAA. And in terms of our recommendations, the first one we have is to provide, we've talked a lot about mental health supports for our students. We've all experienced this secondary trauma, and we've had students who've experienced that and also primary trauma for different reasons. And so providing those mental health supports, especially culturally appropriate supports for BIPOC students and many students who have recently immigrated into our communities. The return to school has been very difficult. As a school counselor, I can attest that. I've had several meetings with students, not only about academic, but also about mental health. So we're definitely very inundated with need, and with the same amount of staffing at our schools. Providing support for BIPOC staff, which includes mental health and professional career-related support to ensure that that BIPOC staff are thriving in their respective spaces, as currently for many it feels like we're just surviving in the workplace. Increasing the number of BIPOC administrators that represent the student population at school sites and at the district office. Create pipelines to develop more BIPOC teachers and administrators. Creating systems and policies that lift all students' needs, which we've been pretty much talking about this entire evening. And this one's important because currently the burden has fallen on the shoulders of staff members. And it's a matter of creating accountability and collaboration by having a director of equity and satellite coordinators at sites to implement and support these changes. So actually having staff members to do this work and not rely on members that already have full-time jobs to do this work after school, during their prep time, during their lunchtime, or on the weekends. And the last one is create ongoing multi-year training. This is going to be ongoing work. And so again, continuing to provide that training, that PD for the entire staff around equitable pedagogy, systems curriculum, and affinity groups training. So, thank you.
And so now we will have the reading of the resolution.
Whereas the Sequoia Union High School District Board of Education reaffirms its commitment to providing safe, welcoming, and affirming spaces for all students, staff, families, and community members, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual identity or orientation, ability or disability, country of origin, or any other identity category or characteristics.
Whereas the Board of Education empathically declares racism and hate have no place in our schools or our society, and we must protect the constitutional rights of every person who lives, works, and learns in our community.
Whereas systemic racism and racial oppression have long led in physical, political, social, legal, economic, and environmental harm on people of color in the United States.
Whereas we must lead, each of us individually and collectively is responsible for creating and nurturing an anti-racist learning environment where every child is respected and valued for who they are, regardless of their skin color. We must actively acknowledge, address, and prevent racial bias.
Whereas we acknowledge that this resolution does not diminish the commitment of the Sequoia Union High School District in the pursuit of its vision to design and implement structures, systems, and policies that achieve equity in our instructional, institutional, and employment practices. Rather, this resolution demonstrates our responsiveness to the dynamic need of our diverse community and ensures we publicly commit to accelerate our efforts around racial equity and equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Whereas the Board of Education recognizes that all of our students have academic potential and bring unique, valuable perspectives and experiences to our classrooms. At the same time, we also recognize that disparities persist in the educational outcomes of students of color, students with limited financial resources, and students with disabilities. We will always work to raise expectations both socially and academically while closing gaps caused by racial barriers.
Whereas the health, safety, and growth of all of our students in mind, body, and spirit are the ends for which the Sequoia Union High School District community continually strives, moving forward together on a journey to provide all of our students with the desire and character to set worthy goals for themselves and means and ability to achieve and be productive, and the wisdom and vision to find their place in this world.
Whereas the Sequoia Union High School District is committed to systemic improvements of policies, programs, and practices that provide equity in student and staff opportunities to succeed, that include but are not limited to curriculum development and equal opportunity employment practices.
Whereas we continuously monitor the effectiveness of the district's priorities and strategic plan to ensure the success of the whole child. The Board of Education expects the superintendent, cabinet, principals, and staff to keep equity and inclusiveness in the forefront as they plan, implement, monitor, and evaluate district-supported programs. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments must be integrated at every level of our school district. The Board of Education further expects actions and outcomes that are evident to students, staff, and the community.
Whereas the Board of Education is reminded that when, with aligned values and community support, our capable staff uses research-based best practices, we see success and expanded opportunities for students. We will not stop thriving for change with bold action until we reach a complete eradication of inequitable educational opportunities.
Whereas the Board of Education is heartened by our diverse, capable, compassionate educators and staff who strive for equity, equal opportunity, and social justice. We are inspired by their commitment, resilience, and willingness to learn to break down barriers that deny our students access to equity and excellence.
Whereas the Board of Education recognizes that to more fully live into our values of diversity, equity, and inclusion requires collective action. We acknowledge that strong community partnerships are a point of pride and strength in our school district, and we will investigate innovative ways to enlist them in these efforts. The Board of Education encourages families and community members to have courageous and honest conversations about racism and realize the roles we can all play in improving our students' educational experiences and post-secondary opportunities. The Board of Education commits to facing these challenges together with our students, their families, our staff, and our beloved Sequoia Union High School District community.
Therefore, be it so resolved that the Sequoia Union High School District reaffirms its commitment and will continually examine itself to ensure it remains an open and inclusive institution of public education for all its students, staff, administrators, community members, and supporters.
Therefore, be it further resolved that racism or discrimination have no place in Sequoia Union High School District, and the Board of Education expects the highest standards of equality of opportunity and fair treatment. We will see each other for our individual worth and human potential. May we move forward from lessons learned and continue to improve both ourselves individually and the Sequoia Union High School District as a much beloved academic institution.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for that spirited and inspirational presentation. And there is an important vote ahead of us. But first, we do want to hear public comment before we get into board discussion and action. I do have one card on this agenda item from Edith Salvatore.
Hello, I just wanted to relay officially to the Board of Trustees, the superintendent, and my wonderful colleagues that SDTA was very excited to learn about these plans from the superintendent, to see them on the agenda, to see this action being embraced by the superintendent so early in her tenure with the district, in what is, there's 9 billion things going on, but not losing track of this. And that SDTA is looking forward to working with the district to achieve all of those lofty whereas and resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I do see one of our panelists' hands up. I don't see any attendee hands up. So we will go to board conversation. I'll give Carrie first shot since you've got your electronic hand up. The rest of you can use your fleshy hands.
Yeah, I do have a question since we have you here tonight. First of all, I want to thank you for your work. I so appreciate that this was teacher and staff driven from your experiences in the classroom and at your school site. So I know this was a heavy lift and a lot of work, and thank you for all that you've done. Because I have you here, I do have a burning question. And the question is, where to start to really make sure that we are serving all kids. And I have been very passionate about this idea of, trauma-informed learning, and we're really doing restorative practices. And I was at a community meeting this week with some community partners, and this was more of a meeting countywide, and the topic was serving all kids. And one of the community partners who works with our kids, sometimes at a school site, but also outside, and again, countywide perspective. And her question was, have all teachers and staff members been trained in trauma-informed practices? And I know the answer to that is no. I didn't say that, because again, she's thinking trauma-informed. But when I think of our district, some people have been trained, but not others. How does, with those topics, restorative practices and trauma-informed did you guys discuss it? And how does that all fit in with this work? And how can we make those things really a reality? I mean, really doing restorative practices and really serving all kids.
Absolutely.
How does it fit?
So a couple of things at Sequoia High School. I believe next Wednesday, a group of 30 teachers are being trained around community circles so that we can bring those restorative practices to our freshmen. And we will roll that out in the spring. So they will have 4 opportunities to do that type of restorative practices with a small group of 15, and each teacher will have a small circle. So that's at Sequoia. MA for the last 2 years has been working with Toby Shrugs Hussein, and their whole staff has been trained in trauma-informed practices. Toby also just led a PD workshop through our PD here in the district for teachers to opt in. I believe the next agenda item with Dr. Williams is coming about bringing USC into facilitation so that it's not just teachers, but it's administrators, it's the cabinet, it's the staff, so that everyone gets a baseline of training. And I believe our intention is to roll that out on January when we have that staff, whatever, right, that P, right? So yes, that is our goal, because we know that in order for all students to have access, it starts with the educators, with the administrators, with the district office, with the school board. So yes, that is in our long-term plan. And it also can't just be a check mark. One of the recommendations that Glenda talked about, it has to be continual. So if this is truly something that we are committed to, don't let it stop with this year. Make sure that it's something that you continually put resources behind so that teachers have the skills in order to help our students thrive. Glenda?
I also wanted to add that last year there was a formation of a social emotional learning task force, and I understand that that task force is going to convene this year. But I think that what's important is to ensure that that curriculum that eventually gets rolled out, or eventually the training, that it's from an anti-racist lens. I just wanted to say that that's really important, that I feel it was lacking last year, and I think it's important to look at that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Pablo has a comment as well.
Yes, just to add on to my colleague said, and a very important part also, like a third prong to this, to your question, Carrie, is to also recognize that we have practices and systems and policies in our schools and in our district that also traumatize our students. So I think a big thing that, as we're going to see in the presentation next agenda items, is also to just take an honest and very truthful and at times painful look at everything in our district and realize, well, what is causing trauma? And I think that is something that we have to take a look, and it's more than just a reflection. It's actually, in a sense, like bringing things to light, exposing it in order for us to say, okay, that is traumatizing our students. What can we do? And not just saying, okay, let's put something there to help those kids deal with the trauma. Like, no, let's change that system so that we're not traumatizing them. So that's the third prong, is being able to actually unearth these things and kind of take an honest look. That's going to be painful at times, but also show some successes. So that's also where we start.
Other board members, Chris.
But to figure out where to look now, but I wanted to begin by thanking the authors. I'm not quite sure. I guess it's collective contributions there. I found it important. The resolution was important, thoughtful. Can't hear? How about hear me and can't? Oh, all right. I'll get a microphone.
Thank you. So I wanted to begin, and I'll repeat myself, for thanking the authors for this statement, which I found to be important, thoughtful, and well articulated, and I'm going to be proud to support this. I want to share with you two of the statements because I think it's nice to repeat some of the whereases in there, but and it's hard to pick out just two, but I think it was important to me that it says we're striving for change with bold action, because I think we need that. And the other thing that we need and we get is we are inspired by your commitment, resilience, and willingness to take on these things. That said, I think most board members, when faced with a resolution, will have ideas for ways they'd like to see it changed. So I wanted to offer 4 amendments for my colleagues to consider. 2 are really stylistic, grammatical, and 2 have a little bit of substance, but I don't think it changes much. One is that I think here in our policy, we refer to this body as the Board of Trustees as opposed to the Board of Education. Board of Education sounds like a Los Angeles term, but I'm not familiar that we've used it. And so I'd suggest that maybe it's the Board of Trustees. The other small thing is toward the end, the document refers to, I think it's eliminating racism or discrimination. I think it's probably racism and discrimination. I can point to in the very last paragraph, therefore be it resolved that racism or discrimination have no place in Sequoia. And I think it's both of those things that have no place. The 2 more slight substance that I want to suggest to my colleagues is that on the first page in the 6th whereas, where we're referring to students of color, students with limited financial resources, and students with disabilities. I think in the following sentence, it would be nice to parallel each of those groups for the barriers we want to break down. So we will always work to raise expectations both socially and academically while closing gaps caused by racial, socioeconomic barriers and the barriers that result of disabilities or something like that. And the 4th and final thing I wanted to suggest to us is in the 2nd whereas on the 2nd page, where we say the Board of Education is heartened. Let me make sure I get the right one. Board of Education is heartened by our diverse, capable, compassionate educators and staff who strive for equity. I'd like to add students there because I have to tell you that I think some of the movers and motivators for us in the work really comes from students as well as the staff. And I know teachers are going to be critical to this, but I'd like to acknowledge the role of students in that.
I would suggest right at that point that we also include the word community, because our community has been an active outreach partner in this work as well and has given significant input that has made a difference in our actions.
That's all. Thank you.
Denise, please.
You all hear me? First of all, I just want to thank you all for this. It took all I could not to cry. And I might, as I look out at my former principal, hello, at MA, going to her with my own stories and worries, having 3 kids, 3 different ability levels, 3 different excitements or no excitement for school. And sitting with her saying, I'm struggling, not because of, collectively teachers were great, but also having some experiences that caused some pause for me. As a parent, and if you can't tell, I'm a person of color, and having my own different experiences growing up. Not all bad, but there's definitely some that stick out that shaped why I became a social worker, why I'm so involved in my kid's life, and also being new to the area, not knowing the community as well. And really sitting with that principal, frankly, angry. And thank God I had a good principal who listened. That doesn't happen everywhere. And so the things that you were saying touched deeply for me as a parent of 3 kids, 2 who graduated and 2 who are doing well in college. Thank you, MA.
But also, as I sit and think about the many of people who, when I did decide to run for the board and trying to figure out, is this really what I want to do with my time? Is it worth it? Because frankly, I don't have a lot of time. So it's like, is it worth it, right? To give up that time and sitting with grandparents of students who are in our school, who were Ravenswood High School graduates, or they were there in the 90s and things of that sort, and some of the pain that some of them talked about and the glory because they like their Ravenswood High School and things of that sort. But they talk about the pain of being in a district that did not see them or what they didn't feel like they were seeing. It's not that the effort wasn't there. And so I am a person who sits at the feet of my elders, and I don't question their experience. I may not agree. I may not even have the knowledge of it. I assume based off their experience, that's what they felt. And so when I hear something like this, it makes me want to cry because it's finally being acknowledged that people were hurt, whether it was intentional, but people were hurt by racism and discrimination or just not being seen in the system, right? And I think it's important to verbally say it. And coming on the board and having the letter written from our community members, calling us out on that, even though it felt a little uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie, first time on a board, get a letter. How do you deal with that? But knowing that the foot soldiers were already here doing the work, and this is an opportunity to acknowledge those foot workers. Our district is not horrible, and we have some areas of growth. And so I think there are ways we can pat ourselves on the back with the grow your own program. Am I saying that right, Bonnie? Or the ability to listen during those trying times, or giving us the budget. Thank you, Jesus, for the budget to do some of the things that we want to do. Thank you, Crystal. Or even our board taking a chance on certain curriculums and ideas and shifting things, even amongst criticism, right? And we are gifted and blessed that we have people who aren't throwing darts at us about things that we know impact kids. At the end of the day, it is my child, it is my daughter, it is my son, it is their lacrosse players, it's their neighbors, it's everyone. At the end of the day, I see those faces and they look different. Sometimes they are white and sometimes they are Black, and sometimes we may not know who they are, right? And so it's like, it's really important to see people, see their abilities. I like to take disabilities out, abilities. So, because everybody has abilities to learn, abilities to be successful, and abilities to come back and be a teacher here. So I am so excited about this. I know I'm standing on my pulpit, so I'm just gonna sit down, but I am extremely excited that it came from y'all and that it came from the grassroots efforts of people who care about our kids, the allies, the friends, those experiences. Thank you for not avoiding that and facing it head on with compassion, love, frustration, tiredness, and stick-to-itiveness, which is probably a word that I made up. There's an English teacher in here somewhere. Thank you so much.
Also, I appreciate all the work that went into it, and I'm happy to support it.
Okay, and I'll throw in, I'm very enthusiastic to support this. What I do want to say is that this is a statement that is another major milestone along a long and tortured path, and it represents a lot of recognition and a lot of work that has been done, and a commitment to greater recognition and much greater work to be done. And that there are real, meaningful, deep-rooted institutional issues that need to be dealt with, that there are a huge range of priorities to be set, to be looking at the most egregious and the most impactful areas where we can set our energies. And that every direction we turn as time goes by, we will be seeing things that have been left unaddressed and need to get better attention. We will look at progress we have made and say, oh, we've had some big breakthroughs here. And it's not a matter of patting yourself on the back and sitting down in the corner and feeling proud of yourself. It's a matter of being able to evaluate what were the actions we took that were most impactful? What made this difference happen? How do we double down on what's really effective to make sure that we continue being more effective as we take the next steps forward? Every change we try to make is going to have embedded in it a sense of how can that still be a problem that is unaddressed today? How did we get this far down the road and we haven't done something about this yet? Some of them are going to be, well, we thought we took this great big step forward there, but look at what's still going on there and how much more work there is to do. We can't be that proud about what we've done. We need to be upset about what remains to be done. And we're going to look at our progress at every step of the way and say, this is slower than the way we wanted to go. We have left more students to suffer these inequities for longer than we should have. And we need to be taking the time to say, we have also improved outcomes for many students, for many staff members, for many community members, that things used to be worse and they're getting a little better. And we need to keep that dual-edged perspective there, that looking backward and seeing where we've come from and the road we've taken helps us be more efficient on that road going forward. But we always need to be looking forward with a great sense of urgency that there is so much more work to do, and it is so urgent. That's what I believe is in this statement, is the commitment to do those things, to hold those beliefs, to do the hard work. We need to remember that the price of progress is always change. It means that for the great things that we want to accomplish, we have to do the difficult, painful work, the introspection, and making ourselves and our institutions change. This is a commitment to continue doing that. We need to be able to look ourselves uncomfortably in the eye and say, here's an area where, despite all of our work, this is just unacceptable and it must change, and get to work on it. This is also an understanding that years from now, we will be still having what feels much like the same conversation. How can so much still be so bad? How can there be so much still to do? Why have we left this until now? But we'll be continuing to surface new things and making them better. And this is a commitment to continue making them better. It's a commitment I'm very, very excited about. You made the comment earlier, looking around the room, you can see that the leaders and the power is still imbalanced and not reflective of our community. You can also look around the room and see that that has changed over recent years and is continuing to change. We are making progress while we are bemoaning the work that is there to be done. And we have to be able to balance those things to make sure that we keep progressing. So I am extremely excited to be making this statement tonight and then to move on to other action items where we take action to put our words into action and make more happen. So again, I thank everybody that has been involved in bringing this to us for the long, hard work, not just of crafting the words, but of helping to shape the vision and the mission and the sense of urgency to get to this point and to launch us forward where we're going. And I would be eager to accept a motion of approval for this.
May I ask whether the board accepts one, 2, 3, or 4 of my suggested edits?
I thought those were all clear improvements, straightforward.
I'd be interested in the opinion of the office. I'd be interested in the opinion of the office.
Yeah, I think they're just simple edits, like we approve them as well. The substance is still there. It's just the wording.
Pablo, your insight as well on the recommendations for change. For language.
I agree with Taja. There's small edits.
I have a question. There was the word ability, Trustee Stevenson. I agree with that, changing that. Yep. Ability.
In the first paragraph, when it talks about specializing in education, to say, regardless of disability. So that's in my.
Agree.
All right, with that, do we have a motion of approval?
I'll move to approve with the edit suggestions by both Chris and Shanice.
I second that.
Okay, as a resolution, is this a roll call vote?
Student trustee Stead,
Yes.
trustee Thompson,
You want to catch the other student trustee who's here now?
He came in very quietly and discreetly, but he's part of the team.
Again.
Welcome, Carlos.
Student trustee Osuna,
Yes.
trustee Thompson.
Yes.
Trustee Stevenson,
Yes.
trustee Ginn, Vice President Dubois,
Yes.
President Sarver.
Yes,
Motion adopted, 5-0.
thank you.
Thank you. Once again, thank you to the members of the EDC. Thank you for holding us accountable, and we will continue to work alongside of you. Thank you. Equity Diversity Committee, the Equity and Diversity Committee. Thank you.
All right, with that bit of excitement, we move on to item 15.2, approval of contracts with the University of Southern California Race and Equity Center.
Thank you, Trustee Sarver. I was at the mic before you even called me because I'm so grateful to Dr. John Pascarella, who's been hanging in there for over an hour to join me in this board item. Not only is he teaching classes and doing meetings tonight, all the while waiting for our turn to speak this evening, but he's a professor of clinical education at USC. He's the Chief Academic Officer of the K-12 Equity Leadership Academies for USC Race and Equity Center. But my favorite thing about him, and he's got easily a page-long resume of things he's written and had published and boards he's served on. He started out as a high school English teacher in the inner city. And so what I have to say about him is I believe that when he talks about bringing actionable professional development for all of our staff, that he will deliver. So I'm so grateful and so delighted that he is still here with us this evening. Dr. Pascarella, many, many thanks to you. My apologies to your colleagues and your wife. He's got some slides to share with us. So John, in the essence of time, I'm going to ask if you would go first.
Thank you so much. And it's a great honor to be here with the Sequoia Union High School District. It was quite an honor to listen in through the last hour of the meeting to see the steps that the important and incredibly difficult work that the members of your community have advanced in order to put forward this resolution. And so it is also my honor to represent the USC Race and Equity Center this evening. So let me begin by just sharing a little history about our center and its founder and executive director, Professor Sean Harper. Professor Sean Harper founded the Center for the Study of Race and Equity in Education in 2011 at the University of Pennsylvania, which was its home for 6 years. The center was then relocated and renamed. We were so fortunate here at the University of Southern California as they recruited and Dr. Harper moved to USC and established and renamed the USC Race and Equity Center in 2017 when he joined our university. Our mission at the USC Race and Equity Center is to eliminate, disrupt, and dismantle racism in all its forms. We do this through rigorous interdisciplinary research, high quality professional learning experiences, the production and wide dissemination of useful tools, trustworthy consultations, and strategy advising, and substantive partnerships. While race and ethnicity are at the epicenter of our work, we also value their intersectionality with other identities and therefore aim to advance equity for all persons experiencing marginalization. Last month, we were invited by Superintendent Williams to prepare 2 scopes of work to, 1, conduct a racial equity climate study of Sequoia Union High School District, and 2, to design and carry out 2 racial equity academies, one for all Sequoia Union employees, faculty, staff, non-certificated staff, leaders, and one for the Sequoia Union executive leadership team. In the next few slides, I'm going to review the key features of the climate study, and then following that, I'll review the key features of the racial equity academies, and after that point, I'm happy to address questions. Okay. Our first scope of work, and we have 2 scopes of work and 2 respective contracts, the first being our racial equity climate study. This study is designed and led by Dr. Kendrick Davis, our Chief Research Officer at the university. And Dr. Davis was unavailable this evening, so I'm going to present the information from our scope of work for the climate study and do my best to address the details of how we conduct the study. As you saw in the scope of work, there are 3 basic phases to the climate study. The first is strategic advising. As we work with your members of your leadership team, your DEIB and task force and members of your Sequoia community, our strategic advising will focus on a foundation setting strategy that is with the goal of setting racial equity goals and indicators. What we'll do is a content review of any developmental and archival documents to date that the district has prepared, reported, and we will continue with an audit of existing survey instruments, quantitative data, and other evaluative tools that the district has used to this point. And we will do that through a racial equity lens. By centering race and equity, we're going to be looking for the ways in which the district has collected information based on race and racial equity indicators previously, and look for opportunities to set new goals and new racial equity indicators. And then in phase 2, we will conduct the climate study portion, which involves convening targeted focus groups of priority stakeholders at each of the Sequoia Union High School District schools. Focus groups may include students of color, their parents or caregivers, teachers, school staff, and administrators. And then following our focus groups, we will then move into 4 district-wide forums held with sets of priority stakeholder populations to present the findings from the quantitative and qualitative data. And in phase 3, once we have completed phase 1 and 2 and have put together a preliminary report after phase 2 of our quantitative and qualitative findings, We then moved to working to assemble racial equity project teams at each of the Sequoia Union schools. And what we do is we look at what the report finds for each of those schools as the major racial equity challenge or opportunity that was documented in that report. Over 6 months, each project team will complete an 8-step project plan with support and feedback from our center experts. And the projects will then launch as the new academic year begins. Our strategic racial equity projects can typically involve project teams of school leaders, faculty, and staff at each of the schools. And those teams are assembled to design and implement these projects to address very specific racial equity problem or opportunity in the school community. And then our racial equity experts work to offer practical and applicable tools and resources along with feedback that might be used in those projects and helpful to the more immediate daily, weekly, and ongoing practices as school leaders and members of the community represented on those project teams. Some examples of projects underway with some of our current partners are listed here on this slide. I'll highlight just a few of them. One, Equity and Justice Initiative, a team approach to designing anti-racist pedagogy, integrating anti-racist learning. The focus on pedagogy and learning in this particular project and at one of our partner schools. The second one, increase awareness of racial bias, white supremacy, non-inclusive curriculum among teachers. Third one, Black Students Matter and Racial Justice Task Force. Fourthly, building a school culture that promotes racial equity. Fifthly, and timely, teaching and practicing racial equity in the digital world as we continue this work through the COVID-19 pandemic. There are many other projects that aren't listed here and a few others that are, and I'm happy to answer questions about the projects themselves. Here's a sample timeline of how the climate study and projects would occur. In phase 1, we would begin in January of 22 through March. Phase 2, moving into March with the climate study focus groups and district-wide forums through December, and with our report at that phase, then moving into phase 3, at which time we will convene our project teams at each of the Sequoia schools and build out the projects between January and June of 23. From there, launching the projects through the 23-24 school year, and in the summer, after assessing and renewing the goals and opportunities of those projects to revisit the opportunities for new racial equity challenges that still exist in the school and are continuing to be revisited and renewed in the year that follows. In this next segment, I'm going to focus on our Racial Equity Leadership Academies, which is the second scope of work and engagement with the district. Our Racial Equity Leadership Academies are designed around 12 core principles. First, that these academies involve deep, challenging, honest conversations about race, racial inequities, and racism. Secondly, that they are rigorous, evidence-based, practically useful content. Thirdly, that they include high participant engagement and opportunities for meaningful personal reflection. Fourthly, strengthening racial literacy and racial problem-solving skills is a priority. Fifthly, sustaining sustainable learning and enduring commitment to advancing racial equity in each of your schools. 6, inclusive treatment of all racial and ethnic groups, resisting the erasure of Asian American, multiracial, Native American, and Pacific Islander persons. Our 7th principle, accepting individual and collective responsibility for racial equity. 8th, analysis of individual actions as well as histories, policies, systems, structures, cultures, and organizational norms. Our 9th principle is strategic thinking, planning, and action through our projects. Our 10th principle is hopeful, optimistic pursuits of racial equity. And our 11th principle is anti-deficit perspectives of students of color, their families, and their communities. And our last principle, number 12, recognizing the vitality of communities of color in our schools depends greatly on racial equity work educators do now and sustain into the future. These principles guide how we coordinate our racial equity leadership academies And in addition to that, in the preparation of each one of our experts, nationally known experts that work to lead our sessions, these sessions are built and our experts are given guidance to provide contemporary cases of racial problems happening in urban K-12 schools. And emphasis is placed on learning from equity gains and racial missteps that have occurred elsewhere, learning how to get ahead of situations and reducing the risk of racial crisis, and learning actionable racial equity leadership strategies in each one of the sessions that are prepared for and led and facilitated by our experts. Here are just a limited list, believe it or not. I packed a lot on this slide. There are many experts that are listed here. There's only so many we could list on a PowerPoint slide, along with on the right-hand side in red, you see about 12 of our Racial Equity Academy topics, which are also represented in the scope of work that has been presented to your district. Okay. And so that concludes the sort of presentation of the contents of our two scopes of work, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have or members of your community may have on the scope of work or the details that I presented this evening.
Thank you for that presentation. And we'd first like to hear if there are any comments that the board should take into account from members of the community present or viewing through Zoom. I have not received any comment cards on this topic yet from inside the room, and I don't see any hands going up among our attendees. So if board members have things they would like to bring into the conversation, Shanice?
I just have a question. I'm not for sure if Dr. Pascal, how do you say your name? Pascarella. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the print. It was kind of blurry. Pascarella. Is the timeline that you presented, if we can go back to the timeline.
Sure. Apologies, one moment.
Okay.
And please just call me John. No problem there.
Oh, okay. All right, Dr. John. Going back to the timeline, the strategic advising, and then it's the climate study. Why does that take like so long? Like it's January to March, strategic advising. Help me understand what that is. And then the climate happens from March to December. This is the equity study, correct?
Mm-hmm.
This is the equity study. Okay, I just want to.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So then from March to December 22nd, then the climate, I'm just not understanding the timeline. I guess I want it to be quicker, but I'm not for sure. You know, this is not my expertise. Can you help me understand those two things?
I think that Dr. Davis scheduled this timeline based on his average engagement with attending meetings and scheduling meetings to ensure that the team has an opportunity to have meaningful input on the developing the equity goals and indicators based on where the district is at the current time. So I think that is really a sense of understanding that there's going to be a content review of your archive, your developmental and your archival documents to get a sense of the work done to date and the various ways it's evolved over time, and any other additional audit of existing survey instruments, quantitative data, or other evaluative tools. That process can take, can be a time-consuming process with, the research team. Having adequate access to and opportunity to review those materials, as well as meet with the leadership teams to lay the groundwork for phase 2. And I apologize that I cannot speak any further. I hope that is helpful. That is my sense of the process that Dr. Davis leads, but I would have to defer to Dr. Davis for additional detail beyond that.
Okay. Huh? What'd you say?
No, to Dr. Davis.
Oh, Dr. Davis, sorry. And what is strategic advising again?
So the strategic advising is the process that Dr. Davis will take with whomever he is meeting with at the district level, to whoever is convened to meet with Dr. Davis and our team of researchers, to go through that process of determining what the goals and the racial equity indicators will be that will be used in the climate study.
Okay, gotcha. And who's I guess that's back to Bonnie and Dr. Williams. So Bonnie, who's the strategic advising group? Have you thought about that?
That's going to be just district leadership. We're also, a lot of the work will be in conjunction with the EDC as to their availability and willingness to do so, or other teacher leaders. And if I could speak to the timeline, I think that those first two pieces are so important. So for us to know what is it that we want the outcomes to be and what are the measures we're going to use, because this is a deeply personal topic. And so I think that people really need to feel that they had an opportunity to weigh in on what they think the measures should be, and then produce, but wait, this is what we've been doing. And we've really tried that. And well, it was different over here. And then making sure that the different focus groups and stakeholders get spoken to. Part of what is built in is 4 community engagement nights for our general public. That's a lot of prep. That's a lot of processing. So I agree with you. I want it done tomorrow as well. But I think it's one of those go slow to go fast, and make sure everybody feels like it was a rich and encompassing process.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all my questions.
I think I would characterize it that it's very easy to reach the wrong destination very rapidly. But it's more of an investment to reach the right destination through the right amount of planning and careful execution.
No, go
Mm-mm.
Can you come to the podium?
No, I think this works over here. I'm not going to the podium. I have three questions which I'll rattle off. First is, this is important and not insignificantly expensive work. What should the board expect in terms of progress reports on this? It seems to me we want to check in on the work. And so that might be for both Dr. Williams and Dr. Pascarella.
Second question, probably for our assistant soup, is we want to make sure teachers have enough time for this training. And if you could say a word about how we accommodate that with the other pressures of teaching, obviously. And the third, particularly for Dr. Pascarella, goes to an understanding I have that in school districts, often the initiatives that are most successful are driven internally by teachers. Now, and yet this is really coming from the outside to some extent. I was pleased to see you've got a theory of change in one of your contracts. And the third kind of alludes to ways that you can work with teachers or make sure of success, that it has life internally. That's the third question I'd have you speak to. How do we make sure this isn't just outside consulting coming in? Questions 1, 2, 3.
So in terms of the progress, at each phase, the timeline, we will prepare and we will provide ongoing updates in terms of where we are. So for example, in the strategic piece where we're going to identify indicators, then we will bring those indicators forth prior to doing the collection of data to support and to start. So at each phase, you will get a check-in. And also just to note that while external, Dr. Davis and Dr. Pascarella have met with the Equity and Diversity Committee and gotten their feedback. So it's really important that this work that we're doing is going to be in response to the resolution and also in response to the work that they have been advocating for in terms of teacher training, in terms of the topics, and also in terms of identifying those inequities that have persisted in our district, and then those things that we have done well. So in order for us to responsively address some of those issues so we can support the growth and access of services for all students and families. For your question around teachers having enough time.
Yes, so we, Vicky Dye and I met with Dr. John and his team earlier this week. And I've really appreciated their flexibility and wanting to really partner with us in our context. And we are looking at doing this series of workshops this year and next year. And that does a couple of things. It means we've got a few different staff development days where we can use part of the time for this work. It carries it out to the point of this not being a one-year wonder, where we're doing at least 2 years of training on this initial stage. And then it also allows us to continue on with some of our other work that we're doing at district-wide. So we're very cognizant of making sure that we do this in a timeline where we're not asking more of teachers than we've been asking in the past for staff development to get this done.
Anything else from Dr. John on theory of change and working internally as well as externally?
And I would ask Dr. Pascarella, if you can also highlight the purpose and deliverables through the strategic racial equity plans that they will create.
Yeah, thanks for the question and the opportunity to address it. I think that what my team in particular on the Racial Equity Academy series is steeped in the research on professional development and the way in which it is successful or not, and what we've learned also through our years of leading and coordinating. I think that it involves deeper partnerships with our school leaders with respect to how, for example, PLCs or faculty learning communities are established or not, and regular ongoing professional learning happens at the school level, and the extent to which this work can be extended through those regularly occurring already spaces in which teachers are meeting and engaging in professional learning beyond the scope of attending our Academy series. With that, the various resources that and strategies and frameworks that get introduced in the series, we are focused on them being applicable, usable, and extendable into that kind of work. And so it is through our debrief sessions after each of the Academy sessions run by our nationally known experts. We then meet and debrief our center experts with whether it's the DEIB team or it's members of your, all the principals are present, or however the school determines who should be present at a debrief session, to then discuss the ways in which that can be and plan for the ways in which that can be then extended into the ongoing professional learning work happening in each individual school. So in addition to that, as Dr. Williams, Superintendent Williams has pointed out, we also are the team that at the phase 3 of the racial equity climate study, when we get to phase 3, we will be convening and working with all of the project teams to carry out the work at the school level. And expect that the racial equity project teams will include members of your faculty, staff, and community members as you deem appropriate, meaning that we have our advice, and it is up to the school to determine who's represented on those teams, and how those teams evolved, particularly over a 2-year process. So I hope that addresses the question adequately. I think there's more nuance to it that depends largely on the district and individual school context, and the folks who are committed, interested, who are volunteering, who want to be a part of the work, who have been raising their hands prior to a racial equity series being run to advance this work. And I think that was certainly represented in our meetings with your DIB team prior to assembling these proposals for Sequoia.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Gary, you have your hand up.
Yes, since we have expert in the room with us. Huh? Mute my computer. There, is that better? So question for Dr. John. I can't help myself because we have an expert in the room. So for me personally, I felt the implicit bias work took a while. It certainly wasn't just 1 or 2 trainings. And there were certain things that sort of jolted me into place. And it was really hard work, right? And I'm still working on it. But one of the things that jolted me into place was the work on white fragility, which was really, it was shocking when I read it, but I saw my flaws. And I'm just wondering if you use that at all, or just, you know, how do you move people? I mean, you need to move fast, right? Really? But you need to sometimes go slow to go fast, but there's a need to go fast. And especially with, I think, sometimes, you know, when we think that we have to bring our whole community along, right? So just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I have many thoughts on that. I think that I'm concerned how much time to take in your meeting, but I think that, first of all, I think that it's so often the case that we have gone through our entire schooling process, our entire socialization without ever centering race or the history of racism in our institutions and our own socialization and the way we've been acculturated with racist bias, racist prejudice, racist ideas. And I think that the work around implicit bias is really focused on, as I think your equity question earlier was focused on, the impact that unconscious bias has in and across historically marginalized groups. And I think equity, coming back to the definition around equity, is re-examining how our actions, efforts, the resources, the funding, decisions that we make as educators result in equal outcomes across historically marginalized groups in our society, in our country, in our district and communities, and across those historically marginalized and those who have been historically privileged. And I think that by examining the system of racism and understanding the ways in which that happens at the institutional policy level, understanding the way it happens in our context through our social interactions, and understanding how it's happening at the self level through our everyday thoughts and decisions in the classroom, in our interactions with parents and caregivers and our students is essentially the commitment around the work is, are we working in solidarity? Is everyone working in solidarity with people of color, or as a person of color with other people of color who have already been fighting to abolish racism and systems of oppression that have, that harm people of color and unjustly benefit white people in this social system of racism in our country and throughout the world. And so I think that the work around white fragility is, and for white folks to engage in, really is focused around choosing to see race and racism, and choosing to recognize the ways in which we white people are racialized not to talk about race. We are socialized not to talk about ourselves as having race, and are socialized to think about other folks and people, people of color as a highly homogenized, unified group, which no one is, and is used, and on top of it, sort of in not recognizing the ways in which, or identifying the ways in which we've been socialized as a white person with a racial identity, we are through that silence reproducing, participating, continuing to participate in a system that benefits and privileges us. And so getting into discussions around white privilege does not mean that your life was not hard or that you did not experience different forms of oppression or different hurdles or challenges. What it means in the context of talking about race is that race was not an obstacle in those situations and those experiences. Now, yes, and there are examples in which white folks have experienced forms of ethnic racism from other whites in our social and historical system, and that history is there. But it is not the same as the experiences that so many different folks of color have experienced throughout our history, and certainly through our own, your community's history. And this is something that I think is, very importantly part of the work, and the aim being that if we're going to work in solidarity as a racially privileged person, then we have to work through a form of questioning and self-interrogation that includes looking at our actions, our language, our private thoughts, our interactions with white people and with BIPOC people, and to interrogate the ways in which we have been socialized white.
Other board questions or comments? Okay, this is an action item for approval of contracts. And these are a couple of contracts for work I'm very excited about. I think it derives very effectively from the resolution we just passed. So I would welcome a motion of approval.
Just really quickly, just with the contracts, we are asking, and the recommendation is for the approval of the contract and the contract amounts, with also the authorization of staff to make some minor adjustments in the language. It doesn't change the work, the scope of work. It's just minor changes that have been recommended that we may adjust. So we'll work with USC to adjust it. But again, it's not substantive changes. It's very minor changes with the language.
Okay.
I'll move to approve both contracts.
I'll second.
Okay, and this is not a roll call. This is just a all those in favor. So all those in favor? All right. It is unanimously approved with minor work to be completed.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much, Dr. John.
Yes.
Thank you,
Yes,
Dr.
Dr. John, thank you
Pascarella.
for hanging out with us for so long.
Thank you.
It's no wonder you're known as the night tripper.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening and rest of your week.
I've been saving that up all for the last hour. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Now I know we also moved item 15.3 up. Is there anybody actually on board waiting to discuss that, or because
Dr. Schimmel.
okay, what I would like to suggest, I've been alert to a certain amount of squirming going on around the room. I'd like to suggest a brief recess so that we can clearly focus on this. All right, it's exactly 8:15. Let's be back at 8:25. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back. And we'll move on to the third action item that we moved up. And then after that, we'll return to our special ed annual update. So our third action item, 15.3, is approval of a response to the civil grand jury report building a racially and ethnically diverse teaching workforce, a challenge for our schools.
Thank you, Dr. Shamal. To the podium. Yeah.
Every year, the grand jury's responsibility is to issue a report. The report this year focused on building racially and ethnically diverse teaching workforce, a challenge for our schools. It was appropriately named because it is a challenge. You start with the teaching workforce that is a baby boomer and millennial age, and you look at the student population of the last 20 years, and it's a completely different generation of students and quite often different in ethnicity. So the grand jury issued a report. It wasn't issued to the Sequoia Union High School District specifically, but all the schools in the county. And all the schools are required to respond to the 11 items that they called out with a response. And the choices are to agree or disagree, and to then also indicate what you're going to do about it. If you agree, you have to have a plan. Something's already in place or something will be in place. If you disagree, then what is the reason that you disagree and why? And it has to be filed by November 5th. And the Board of Education has to take action. And so we read through the report, wrote the responses, and tonight the board has looked at the responses and will take action to approve the response to the grand jury, which will then go under the superintendent's signature and be returned to the court. Any questions that I might answer?
Carrie?
I think I have a question more for Alan. So it surprised me, the reference to the San Mateo County School Boards Association and the Equity Network. First of all, I'm surprised that the grand jury would point that out. I do feel that that work is ongoing. And for the audience, there was an equity class for school board members, about 20 hours. Many of us attended and completed that class, and I feel that the work is continuing. I don't believe that the pandemic disrupted that work. And I don't know if the grand jury understands that the San Mateo County School Boards Association is really an education arm for school board members and an advocacy organization. Many school board members are also participating in the Equity Network through the California School Boards Association. And there's also book clubs that are going on, right, around the topic of equity. So I don't understand why so Alan, I just wonder if you have any perspective on that. And I don't really agree, but with that should have been pointed out.
I would jump in on this. I think I agree with the concern, and I think to a certain extent it applies to much of the list of points that were raised in general. That when an organization like a grand jury looks into the operations of various organizations from outside, they're going to draw certain conclusions that may not be very reflective of the work going on inside. And for the San Mateo County School Boards Association Equity Network, I think there was a year and a half of groundwork that was laid before the shelter in place order went down. And in many, many ways, the SMC-SBA group has functioned more closely, more interactively through meetings on Zoom with greater regularity since the shelter in place. And work that came out of that equity network came into our district as well as several others and remained a topic of conversation. And in fact, a lot of that work has led up to the things, or were contributing pieces leading up toward a lot of the events that have gone on tonight, and the resolution we passed. So to me, I would say that certainly the pandemic has been disruptive. But I mean, their statement about restricted to meeting online as a result, the group has had limited opportunities. That group has made multiple opportunities and worked hard at them. But equally to say, the pandemic has been hugely disruptive, and certainly the focus that was coming out of that equity network, I think, would have gotten more attention if so many cycles were not being diverted to everything that was going on with the pandemic. And to me, I mean, the way that reflects kind of the whole piece of the reporting is there's lots of ways in which kind of the claim is rather simplified of, you know, this is a gap or this is a problem. And the answer is typically, yes, it's something that we've been aware of and working on, and here's what we have done, and here are some things that we have in the works to be doing next. So, you know, to the extent that it's, gee, the pandemic has disrupted the work of the equity network. Yep, like everything else. But to draw the conclusion that the work of the equity network got parked on the side of the road or thrown on in the trash during that period of time is not a valid conclusion. So to me, I think, again, for the purposes of the response, I do think it's reasonable to accept it, but it's worth noting that this, like many of the other items in this report, is it's work ongoing, and there's, you know, work has been done and there's more work to do.
That's the way I wrote the response. I took it very similar to as you clearly expressed. I didn't take it personal to Sequoia because I know what efforts you're making, but they did this for the county, and I
Yeah.
don't know what efforts. And we didn't make that statement, and we were saying, if that's what you feel, obviously the pandemic had some disruptions to just scheduling meetings, getting people there, safety kinds of things. Something might have gotten postponed. I don't know the details, but it wasn't worth arguing about. We know what we're doing. You can see that evidence tonight. And what happens with this is really up to the court system and the grand jury and all of that. They really don't have authority to direct you to do anything.
Yeah, I think, you know, my sense is that I don't read this as our district, you know, this item or any of the entire report. I don't read it as our district is accused of certain things and we are under scrutiny for making amends, but it's just, it's kind of calling out, here are widespread issues that are evidenced in this way across the county. And we want to be sure that they are a focus of attention in this district, and action is being taken and more action is being planned. And I do feel that all of the responses indicated that understanding.
I think I'm going to have to vote no on it just because I'm sorry, I'm really involved in that organization. So it bothers me. It bothers me that the grand jury would point that out as a problem. So I'm going to have to vote no.
Let me ask instead if there are some specific ways that you would want to change the details of this response to.
It bothers me that the grand jury would call that out. So I'm going to vote no. The San Mateo County School Boards Association section of their report. So I don't want to hold it up to reword it. So it'll just have to be a 4-1 vote.
I mean, that's fine, but I do want to put this in the perspective of this letter is actually about us, right? I mean, I get about the school board association, but as my mama would say, this is about me. So what is my responsibility in this? And I think when I think of this, I actually had a lot of questions because I was like, grand jury, what does this mean? And I was being rich, asking all the questions, and I was like trying to be analytical. It didn't work, but I was like, what is this really about? So I kind of looked it up, right? And so around what is a grand jury and what does a grand jury do? And so when I thought about this is an independent investigation. There must have been a concern where there had to be an independent investigation, right? So why is that there, right? And it says that, it's an ombudsman of citizens who really looked and analyzed how we were dealing with the reflection of our teaching community to our student body. And then when they talked about submitting meaningful solutions. And so when I think about this, I think about more of the essence of it, right? If I've been on this board since December, of course, the things that they were talking about are essence of what people have been talking about all along. Before the past trustee stepped down, or was it reelected, Georgia, she talked about housing and the impact on our community. Actually, there's an impact, if you look at globally, about the impacts on whether or not you continue to have the diverse pool of teachers, particularly new teachers coming to the field, right? And keeping that maintaining our experience, but also recruiting new teachers to our community. So housing is an issue. Or if I think about what keeps a teacher from staying in our district as we struggle to keep communities of color, of teachers and staff represented, so we can have the reflection of our students. These things to me are true. So when I think about the step back, the essence of it is actually true. Right? And so if it's true, as much as I want to say SBA, whatever, is doing what they're are doing what they're supposed to do, I'm trying to say, what is our responsibility, right? And this is our time to respond to say what we are doing. So when I think about the letter, I actually talked to Dr. Williams. I said, everybody else just said, we agree, we agree, we agree. One sentence, 2 pages, it was done. But ours, what I'm proud about is that it's more specific. We're calling ourselves to a higher standard of saying, what are we doing that someone investigated and actually told us what we already knew around the issues that impact the quality of teaching, the recruiting quality teachers, having students and having teachers that represent our population. And so for me, it is just signing off on something that we're already doing, and our public can hold us accountable as well, because they have already started indicating that these issues have been here. It just came in one email here, one email there, and then we scramble and try to figure out, are we doing something about it, right? And I just think, and I respect you, Trustee Dubois, if you want to say no, I'm not trying to convince you at all, but I'm just thinking about the essence of the report.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your comments. It's just that I've been through several grand jury reports.
Okay.
And so I think, I just can't vote yes if there's something I really disagree with. All the other points are fine. I don't think it's going to disrupt anything. I don't want to slow it down, but I do want to vote no. And I think it's because I've seen several grand jury reports come across our district. So and they can talk to me if they want. They probably won't even notice, but if they do, I'll talk to them.
Okay, I could continue with one more round of thoughts, but then I want to move on to just other people. The other detail I'm kind of seeing and thinking about, one of the statements they make there at the bottom of that number 9. Consequently, as of January 2021, their ability to both identify and deliver on stated outcomes has been limited. I would say that looking back to January of this year, the online work that the SMC-SBA was doing was meeting very regularly online with the county superintendent to talk about safety measures for reopening schools. And that the focus that had been on the equity network was not evident in the group interactions. And all of the in-person meetings that had been scheduled were canceled and put aside. And a lot of the work that individual school boards were doing with the CSBA equity network as part of their follow-up tended to be put on hold for a while. So to me, that particular piece of it, I think that the CSBA has done a huge amount of work over the course of this calendar year since that stated date to really return our countywide focus toward the issues of education beyond just health, safety, and return to the classroom. Not to neglect that issue, but to make sure that we stop neglecting some of the other issues. So I would have less disagreement with that particular line in there as of January 2021. I think this is looking at a period of time in the last 3/4 of 2020 where essentially this work had been put aside. And they're calling out that, yep, it was disrupted for that period of time. And our response again says, yep, there were disruptions and here's what we're doing. I would feel comfortable even with my very active insider status in SMCSBA in agreeing with what's here. And I do think that if that is the difference as to whether or not our board supports this response 5-0, I would like to see that happen. But all I can do is lay out the arguments.
Mr. President, can I add this to the mix? Because there really aren't just the choice of agree or disagree. There's the one that's the lack of information to agree or disagree. And I also wonder, which we've used in other parts, or I wonder whether we can just affirmatively say we cannot agree or disagree with this. And leaving the rest intact, because I think you support both of our representatives to that organization, support the rest of the statement. Yes, so we're not limited just to agree or disagree. There's one clause that we've used before, which is we lack the information to agree or disagree. Also wonder whether we can just say we do not either agree or disagree, which may address some of those concerns, because it's only that conclusion, I think, that you're calling into question and not the rest of the statement there to the grand jury. I mean, if that helped us achieve, the problem with the dissent on this, unless somebody reads the minutes, they're not going to know what the dissent is about, right? And I guess the reason I might hope that the board does a 5-0 on this is we've just approved a resolution that and then some funding and professional development, the things the district is affirmatively doing to address work that the grand jury is highlighting.
If you guys want to do Chris's suggestion, I don't really feel it's that important to have a 5-0 vote on this, but.
All right, I would be happy to say that, the district does not have the information to accept or dispute the grand jury's findings for the purpose of this response, and then continue with everything else exactly as it was written.
The district does not.
have the information to accept or dispute the grand jury's finding. Or, yeah, I mean, it's a finding about a different organization.
So we'll start the paragraph with that sentence.
Yeah,
It mirrors the one above, district lacks information to fully agree
Right.
or disagree with this finding,
yeah,
period.
Yeah, we'll make the necessary change. I have the language.
yeah.
If that's the board's pleasure, we'll put that there.
With that recommendation, I'd be happy to move approval of the letter for response.
Okay, I'll second.
Okay, and again, this is just a vote, I believe. So all those in favor? Aye. Okay, it is unanimously approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So now, with great excitement, we return to our information item. Item 12.1, the special education annual update. Julia and team, take it away.
Good evening. Just wait, would you mind putting it up? It's not running yet. All right. Good evening, Board of Trustees, Superintendent Williams, members of Cabinet. Our focus for this evening is our special education annual board update. My name is Ilya Venlar. I'm the special ed director, and with me are my co-presenters, Claire Chandler, coordinator of special education, and Carla Crenshaw, our other coordinator of special education. Our focus for the 2021-2022 school year is to successfully resume in-person instruction, expand our continuum of district placement options, make progress towards our state-identified compliance measures, and ensure that all our Sequoia High School District students with special needs are offered a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment at our comprehensive sites, all aligned with Dr. Williams' 7 and 3 goals as published on our website. To that effect, we are highlighting completion of our individualized education plans or IEPs by continuing the remote Zoom option for easy access for our parents who are not always able to attend in person. Our student education information system compliance, which is our monitoring organism to direct our numbers to the state. Professional development for new case managers during our new teacher orientation week, as well as our professional development days in September and January. Refresher training for returning case managers on how to remain compliant with data reporting, as well as electronic signatures, again, to make the process easy and accessible for our parents. During the 2020 school year, we were required to resume in-person assessments, even though we were still on distance learning in August of 2020. And we did that by utilizing the Q Global platform, which is an educational psychologist online testing system to establish special education eligibility. We continued our academic testing through the Wechsler Individual Achievement Test and the Woodcock-Johnson Achievement Test, which commensurate with our feeder districts using the same test so that we have a clear picture of a student profile before students enter our high school district. And then we were very excited to be able to add additional bilingual school psychologists who were able to perform these tests in students' native language. Also excited for us was being able to be fully staffed for all our related service providers. They're listed here as occupational therapy, our assistive technology service, physical therapy, speech and language, transportation, and very importantly, student engagement services, which is a service that we use to transition students back to the home environment from residential treatment centers, as well as non-public schools.
Buenas noches. My name is Carla Crenshaw, and I'm the coordinator of special ed and also the principal of the Satellite Plus program. So like everybody here, we've been consumed with our response to COVID and the learning loss that is experienced by some of our most vulnerable and complex students. So as a result, we anticipated this coming along, and not the pandemic, but our response. And so we did a great deal of planning. So we came up with a plan that has some students addressing learning loss via the supports that are provided in the general education classroom. For some of our other students, they required a very defined plan with additional services to meet that learning loss. So some of the things that we did to plan for this is hire additional staff. So we hired speech and language therapists, psychologists, anticipating the mental health need. We hired some additional support there. We extended our special ed summer school. It was called Extended School Year. And what we did is we added an additional 8 days to the calendar than we normally provide, and then increase the day, the extended school year day by 30 additional minutes in order to meet those needs. One of the things that we did was we realized that for some of our most fragile populations and students that had very limited time with us that are about to leave our system, this group here decided to put our money where our mouth is, and we got into the classroom and started cohort groups on November 4th of 2020. So we took on our role as teachers, and we provided those supports. Additionally, what we did is we took all those resources and we allocated them during the extended school year time so that we would have a smoother transition into the fall. And we also, because we went live for our extended school year program, all three of us worked all summer long to be able to supervise those programs.
And as I think most of you know, in special education, we wouldn't function without our individualized education plans, and that requires meetings. So we gave you the data for the 19-20 school year. And as you can see, we continued to hold meetings throughout the entire school year. Even when the pandemic forced us to shelter in place, our timelines didn't stop. So you'll see March through June, we continued to hold those meetings, which totaled 1,441 various meetings, 50 of which were initial assessments to determine student eligibility. Keep in mind, most of these students require a minimum of 3 staff members from our district, a special education case manager, general education teacher, and local education agency administrator. In addition, there may be other designated instruction and service providers, such as our vision services, our speech and language therapists. So you're talking multiple staff members in these meetings. Meetings on average last 1.5 hours. Some are much longer. Therefore, if you totaled that out, you're talking an average of 2,161 minutes for those meetings in 1920. That brings us to 2021, where everything was held via Zoom. And I have to give shout outs to all of our teachers and the comprehensive sites that managed to figure out Zoom and getting parents to participate. And so during that time period, we held 1,728 meetings, 51 of which were initial IEPs. That was roughly 287 more meetings in 2021 than 1920.
So moving forward, some of the things that we've done to increase supports for students with disabilities included, we're starting to bring in a lot of our students that have that are medically fragile. And so we hired a licensed vocational nurse to have some of these students come back to our schools. We talked about our speech and language, how we increased it. And our psychologists were key, and particularly with the data that Claire just shared, because of shelter in place, the feeder districts had not completed all the assessments that they needed to do. So we had to be prepared to absorb that and to do that. So some of our more exciting endeavors have been around professional development. We have been, we talked about the case management training, which helps with our goal of compliance and the world of special ed is ruled by compliance. We had training for former pairs of co-teachers and new pairs to be able to, again, further our inclusive practices. And there was the California dyslexia law that was passed, and it's AB 1369, which charges the school district to be able to provide specialized instruction for students with dyslexia and other reading disorders. And so we've started to train all our folks at the sites, including some non-general education. So like our intervention specialists, et cetera, et cetera. The Sunday training is a curriculum that is evidence-based, research-based, specifically for dyslexia. And so, yeah, so that's kind of our next step, is to address that particular law.
Okay, so another focus over the 2 years has been expanding the continuum of placement options within the district. And I know I've talked to the board before about the satellite program. And so that program was actually designed to support students so that we could serve them in district rather than sending to non-public school placements. And the satellite program was implemented in the 1920 school year. 3 classrooms here, district office campus, one which is a small group intensive, another one to support students on the autism spectrum, and the third one, students with social emotional needs. In 1920, the enrollment was 43 students. 21-22, the enrollment was 37.
We've had 8 students graduate with their diploma or equivalent in the 2 years that the program has been running. 3 students have been able to return full-time to their comprehensive homeschool site successfully. And this year we have an additional 3 students bridging back to their homeschool site through hybrid schedules. This program was one of the programs identified for the in-person cohorts that we did in November of 2020, as well as the in-person during the extended school year. Students in the program recently participated in a Heritage Day and completed an art project modeled after Diego Rivera's artwork. And the feedback from the students after that day occurred was extremely positive, and they were really excited about it. I forgot the student sample artworks in my office, but I can email them to you if you would like to see them. So we have amplified our satellite program, and last year we started Satellite Plus, obviously during distance learning, but this year we're live, and we are on Green Street in East Palo Alto. And I welcome any of you guys who want to come and take a look. So the Satellite Plus program was created for students that had not a lot of success with their academics, their emotional regulation, behavior, etc. It's not on a comprehensive site, obviously. It is really a relational program. And so one of the things that we did was, with all the students who had experienced not a lot of success, we concentrated the first month and a half to build relationships. After that, after we had a relationship with the students, then we introduced the rigor, the academic rigor. The program is comprised of 2 classrooms, no more than 24 kids total in the school. We have one, it's a collaborative with an agency called Beacon, and they have particular expertise in mental health and behavior. And so each one of our classrooms has no more than 12. We have an educational specialist. We have a behavior coach from Beacon. We have a paraprofessional, and we have a mental health therapist embedded in each one of the classrooms. Let's see. It's been a wonderful journey watching these kids who, some of them were previous non-attenders, start coming, and the feedback has been really wonderful. But it's because it's such a small place that we make those connections and support student learning. So this year at Satellite Plus, we have accepted donations from Home Depot, and the students created their community garden, which they have salads and make things like that. We have a basketball coach that is teaching kids specific basketball skills, and he happens to be our behavior coach as well. We have Friday, we make our own ice cream. And we have math poker. We just had a kayaking trip, and it was a critical trip because it built trust among the students, and also let them shine their leadership skills in different ways. So coming up for Satellite Plus in the next month, we're looking forward to a ropes course. And we are also, a gentleman who's an educator in East Palo Alto is an expert on African and Brazilian percussion. And so he will be coming in and showing the kids how to drum, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the highlights from Satellite Plus. Oh yeah, I don't know where. Oh, okay. Doesn't matter, it's me anyway. So another big area of focus in the department was the development of the Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervention Services Plan, or CSACE. And I think I'll just say that because the other way is much too long. And this is a plan that we had to develop and will continue to work on and monitor over the course of 3 years. The primary area of focus is to address the disproportionality, specifically with our students who identify as African American with an eligibility under other health impairment. So we did a lot of file reviews, talking to our feeder districts to develop the root cause analysis. We've done a lot of professional development, in particular, coordinated professional development with our feeder districts around eligibility for that subset of students. We're working very closely with our feeder districts regarding matriculation and starting those conversations earlier in the year. Involving all the stakeholders, I just got a 5-minute warning. And then the other part is the equity work. So we're working with our CSACE consultant, Dr. Mary Bacon, working on mirror and window work. We also held both student and parent focus groups, which were very helpful. And so we would like to give a special note of appreciation to Trustee Stevenson for being part of our stakeholders group and helping us move our CSACE efforts forward. Oh, I have the next one too. Okay. So when Governor Newsom agreed or signed Assembly Bill 130, our team went to work to develop an analysis for our site teams to use in IEP meetings to facilitate the discussion to determine whether independent studies was a free, appropriate public education for each individual student. We developed a script for our site teams to use and vetted it with stakeholders, which included program specialists and special education advisory committee members. We also provided program specialists and administrative supports to case managers with the implementation. Once we receive a request for independent studies, the IEP team must meet within 30 days of that request being received and make a decision as to whether independent studies is appropriate. If it is appropriate, then we have to provide for the provision of related services, and we discussed that as part of that conversation. As of the development of this slideshow, we also did hire a designated 0.3 full-time equivalent education specialist to help support those requests. We've had 23 requests for students who were already in independent studies prior return to independent studies, and we've approved 9 of the requests.
Our fiscal highlights show a 3-year comparison in terms of our spending. The biggest increase is going to be in certificated and classified salaries as well as in benefits. However, I do want to point out that 2021 was an abnormal year. As you can see, we had a slight decrease in our contribution to the general fund of roughly $609,000, and that was partly due to an increase in some of our SELPA funding for excessive and extraordinary costs, and a larger increase in our mental health distribution from the SELPA. We can only guess, obviously, what it's going to look like in 21-22. But more importantly, I would like to point out the increase in the numbers of students with IEPs. In the 1920 school year, we had 1,359 students. Last year, we went up with initial assessments to 1,406. As of September this year, 1,486 students need special education services. Again, the largest increase went to salaries and benefits. However, the 2021 increase in our total budget was slightly less than in 1920. And another important number that we look at is, relatively speaking, how do we compare to similar high school districts in San Mateo County and Santa Clara County? The state average for special education spending is about 20% of the total budget. We're below that. We went up slightly, but right now we are at 18%. And that is, again, it's below what the state commensurate number is for special education spending. To wrap it up, what we're asking from you, the board, is continued support for our 3 large areas of our goals: compliance, equity, and alignment. We didn't speak a lot about the alignment piece, but with Dr. Williams here and her entry goal, Bonnie's work on the LCAP, we wanted to make sure that what we're doing on our department level is helpful to moving our entire district forward. And again, MTSS and our collaboration with student services is going to be a big part of that for the coming years. We welcome questions.
Excellent. I'd just like to make the observation, this particular graphic looks to me like an oncoming train. Got a cow catcher and a headlight, and it's barreling down the tunnel in our direction, which is an interesting metaphor for special education. With that irrelevant observation, welcome some questions and comments from other board members. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. All right, we do have a comment from Abby Corman. Yeah, she's unmuting herself. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name's Abby Corman, teacher at Menlo Atherton. I so appreciated hearing this share out. Thank you for that thoughtful and thorough presentation. I was particularly struck by the information about Satellite Plus. Even though I've been in the district and a community member for more than 10 years, I know very little about that program. So I was really enthusiastic hearing that work that's being done. I was also struck to hear, I think I heard that we're fully staffed, and that was just a question that I had. I heard that staffing, of course, is the largest bulk of our budget for our special education students, and really probably for everything in our district. But I was hoping to hear more about that if possible. From my lens at the large comprehensive site, trying to get students tested, having the behavior specialist come. That was sort of not the messaging I was hearing. We weren't fully staffed. I know in our LCAP plan, we had talked about hiring multiple psychologists. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about our staffing, our student-facing staffing. Thank you.
So the comment about staffing was related services, which are our auxiliary services as part of the student's needs through their individualized education plan. And it really was directed towards an occupational therapist, a physical therapist. Those are very difficult to staff positions. And we're in competition with many other districts in the county. So to be able to have those positions filled and to be able to serve students during the summer, that was our main goal, so that we didn't start the year behind in related services. It wasn't in the context of teachers.
And we had another comment card from Edith.
Thank you. I wanted to make some comments like Abby mentioned. I think many of our employees probably are not very familiar with the Satellite and Satellite Plus programs and their locations. The Satellite Plus program being located on Green Street with Carla right there. The Satellite program is located in the area, sort of the area between the district office and Sequoia High School. And our teachers in that program have expressed at times some concerns that because they are only 2 classrooms and they're not affiliated with the site, they lack some of the supports that you come to expect when you are at a fully integrated site. They do not have security. They don't have necessarily other supports that they need. And the special ed administration staff is often spread thin to many different locations. And so it is a struggle for them. And it's one that I hope that the special ed administration continues to look at and brainstorm, because we definitely have some of our students of most need in that program, and their teachers are being worn out with lack of, not lack of intentional support, but lack of actual people and systems that would come if they were at a larger school. Additionally, there was a comment about the behavior specialists, and I want to share with the board that our behavior specialists from the last few years transitioned out of that position and had relayed concerns about the caseload size and work size. And I think that speaks to Ms. Corman's comments about the ability for the behavior specialist to get in and do some of the work that is expected by general ed teachers, or perhaps by the education specialists who are working with those students. So they are not easy to come by, behavior specialists, but if you find one and we have money for them, we could probably do with a couple more. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith, for those comments. A couple of responses. Unfortunately, our behavior specialist suffered a personal health issue and as well as a personal bereavement issue. And so that compounded the perception that she was unable to provide those services. She has since recovered and is back on campus. So we're hoping that that issue will soon be resolved. And we're also looking in some additional supports through extra COVID monies. And to Edith's point, it is difficult to hire qualified personnel with that BCBA distinction. Our satellite staff who is on the district office campus, it was difficult for all our staff in special ed to return to in-person with instruction with students they hadn't served, and especially ninth graders that they essentially did not have a relationship with. And again, those are our most impacted kids that are not able to thrive on a comprehensive site. We also lost some classified staff that was assigned to the classrooms. Again, those positions have all since been filled. So we are definitely in a better space than we were when we opened school in August.
Thank you. Other board member comments, questions? Chris?
Very quickly. Oh, if I'm on, wanted to acknowledge the challenge you three face and the importance of your work. And there was a quick note in there about the rolling up of sleeves you did during the pandemic. And I want to say thank you personally. And I think that the district really owes you a debt of gratitude for that work and that willingness to step in where it was greatly needed. Grateful for the report. The piece that's missing that I hope that is appropriately missing this year, I think, that I guess I'd like to see in future years are some measures of outcomes for students. We saw counts and we saw programs and we saw money. We always see money. But I didn't see a measure of how students are doing. And I know that we have to take that in context. I know educational measurement is difficult, but still would like some conversation about the metrics that you personally use to assess whether we're being successful, and that gets shared with us as a board.
Yeah, and real briefly, when I started here in 2018, just as an example of measurement, we had 65 students in non-public schools. And we just looked at the number today, and we have 30 students district-wide. And our increase in total number of special education students is about 250 more than we started with in 2018. So you're absolutely right. We closely track our least restrictive environment, and our goal really is to have students be educated at their home schools in district.
Of course, I'm asking for more than that, not just the programs that are, how many kids we have in the programs that we have, but how are they doing? We have on the district dashboard, which we haven't reviewed, there is a breakout, I think, for special education students. I'm not sure that those are the appropriate measures. I'm not sure that when we haven't looked at that in a while, but the basic question is, how are we doing serving the students?
Thank you. We will have that report for you.
And it's sort of a request of the superintendent.
No, I was just going to respond, Trustee Thompson, that we will get back with the report regarding the student progress over time and what was some of the root causes and how they were mitigated. So we will give a report at the next meeting to the board with your question. Thank you.
Shawnee's.
Thank you all for your report tonight. I really appreciate it. I think we don't always get to hear from our students in special ed services and what kind of services are supporting them for the long term as far as their academic growth, their social and emotional learning, their mental health, whatever it is that they're eligible for. I do have a couple questions. I'm just going to run through them and then maybe you guys can answer them. I had actually sent you all an email, and thank you so much for responding about in special ed, you had different educational categories. So one of the beauties of special education, when you talk about diversity of learners, it is everything from other health impairments to multiple areas of long-term disabilities that's going to be with them for a lifetime or something that's just for their learning. So it's very, very diverse. And so I know within that beauty of that diversity and spectrum that there's also challenges and there's also different tools for different kiddos who have different profiles and learning abilities. So when I asked you guys about the breakdown of the eligibility, one of the things that stood out is that 70% of the individuals who have IEPs have learning disabilities, meaning that I'm assuming that there's like ADHD, there's a reading disorder, there's dysgraphia, all these kinds of things. And so my question for that one is that, are they in general ed? And I think that that's very important. I'm looking at Bonnie because you do the educational services. So that is different than a kiddo who's at Green, or let me change that, not kiddo, sorry. Student or learner who is at, I'm seeing Bonnie's head, I'm saying it right, at Green Street or Satellite Plus is very different than a student or a person who's learning in a general ed environment. So are those kids in general ed? Are they being included? And if so, how do you support the teacher? Because I can only imagine with the diverse learners in the classroom. And when I say diverse learners, I'm really thinking about how kids learn, not the diversity of race and equity, but more so the diverse learners. Like, how did the teacher get support with all of that? And what does those services look like for those kiddos? Because I saw the breakdown for like autism and speech and all that good stuff. And then my next question is, here it is. One of the things I'm interested in, I'm not for sure if it's on the docket or if we can do it, Dr. Williams, but feeling like parents need their own like advisory for parents who have children with different learning abilities. I don't know if there's a place on site councils, but those needs are very different than the individuals with who can don't need as much support, intensive support. So those are my two questions. And the other thing that I noticed is that there's been an increase since the pandemic. And I was wondering, even if it's a guess, where is the movement? Is it in 504 plans? Is it in IEPs? So that we can begin to kind of think about not just this school year, but what do we need to think about for the future?
Thank you, Trustee Stevenson. In terms of the specific learning disability, which is the largest category, because what it tells us, it's a processing deficit, and there is a standard deviation through EdCode that determines eligibility for specific learning disability. So what that means is that there is a relative weakness in an academic area that is 22 points below the mean. And so it's a discrepancy model that we're utilizing. And when we're saying specific learning disability, it's a large term that could include auditory processing, visual processing. It's not just one thing. It really is a huge bucket, if you will, of relative weaknesses. And so when we're talking about supporting those students, what we're really looking at is where does the relative weakness show up in the academic progress. And when we're talking about general education, you could have a specific learning disability with a weakness in math, but be perfectly doing well in English language. And so for English, you could be in a general education class, no additional supports needed, but your relative weakness is in math. And then we can add a study skills class, a specialized academic instruction class, a co-taught class. So the supports are determined by where the relative weakness is based on the processing deficit.
Yeah, that doesn't quite answer my question. So, I'm sorry, what, Dr. Williams?
If it's okay, if I may.
Yes.
If we can take the questions and then we can work on a response to the
thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
I'd appreciate that. And so with the team. Thank you.
I learned today about, or from the presentation, that there's some additional satellite and satellite plus. Are those the only places, or are there more besides the names? The school, there's a list of schools outside this building on the wall, and satellite plus are on there. Are there others that have students that are run by the district? And what are their names?
We have.
And how many students are at it?
Talking the mic.
Thank you. We have our post-secondary program. It's called Trace, which is on the Sequoia outskirts. There are 84 students in 5 classrooms, and it's for students ages 18 to 22 who earns a certificate of achievement and need an additional 4 years in a transition program.
There's Trace, there's Satellite, and there's Satellite Plus. And can you remind me how many are in Satellite and Satellite Plus?
There are 24 students in Satellite Plus and 38 in Satellite.
Okay, and then you mentioned that there are 30 in non-public schools.
Currently, yes.
Are those the same ones when we see settlements in closed session? That's the 30?
No. Settlements, there is a difference between students on a settlement agreement and students who are in a non-public school because of their IEP.
Okay, so do the numbers in special ed include the settlements?
Yes.
Are they in services?
Yes, in contracts. Are you referring to the budget?
The slide that has money by year in category?
Yes, they're included.
And I'm wondering which category the settlements are in.
Under services and then under contracts. Services are our contracts.
Services and contracts are the same.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the 30, and do we know how many are in totals and settlements? Is that something that is not?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get an idea of the scope. Is it, okay. And then I guess a general question, I learned tonight about the Satellite and Satellite Plus programs. How do you think about, so there's 30 in non-public schools, some number that have settlements. Make up a number, there's 50 people that aren't served by the district. What sort of analysis, or how often do you think about, would it make sense to open a program to meet the needs of some of those students, perhaps even offer this program to other students in the county that would pay to send their students here? Like, what's the process like for thinking about? Is that something you think about and
And if so, like, maybe just get some thoughts about, or how do you think about that? How do you think, or is there something you think we should do that we're not doing, or you think it's just right as it is? And I don't know, I'm not really asking a specific question, but just kind of your thoughts on, can we serve more of our students in a way that makes sense and is better for them? And can we help others in the broader area by meeting needs in a way that?
Yes, and I can guarantee you that's something I think about all the time. My team thinks about it all the time. And what we found was with the development of Satellite and Satellite Plus, we prevented tens of students not having to go to a non-public school at a cost of $100,000 plus per student, and also giving them a much richer experience in their own community. So on a philosophical and ethical and moral and equity level, it's always best for a student not to have to be separated and be in a more restrictive setting. So I think that's an area where we are making progress. Where it's going to be difficult for us is legally when students matriculate to the high school district from the elementary district. There is something in the law which is called stay put, and that means that the IEP that the elementary district developed and that parents consented to at the time will transfer over to the high school district, and we're obligated to make what we call a comparable offer. And when that offer we inherit is a non-public school, it will be difficult for us to not offer a non-public school. And some of the ideas that we're working on is because of our relationship with Beacon, what could happen if we designate a classroom at our Green Street campus as a non-public school classroom so that legally we can make a comparable state put offer. That's something that we're working on. We are in discussion with that. I know Crystal has done a lot of work with contracts and what it looks like. It requires the non-public school to request from the state a specific code. So the classroom is designated as a non-public school classroom. So we're working on that behind the scenes. Again, COVID really did a little bit of a number on us because we essentially had to restart from scratch because the students that we intended to serve in person were, virtually for this year. But those are definitely some of the options that we're looking into. And then, down the road, we can expand by having San Mateo County students attend that program at interdistrict transfer rate. But again, that will come once we have confidence that we serve our kids first who live here.
Yeah, great. I'm interested in seeing as much of that as you all think makes sense to do. So thank you.
So I also want to thank you for a great presentation. Thank you also for the careful effort to use all of the full phrases behind that huge pile of acronyms. I know as a 12-year veteran of receiving these updates, you see the acronyms and they kind of become part of your background. And then every once in a while you look at them and say, I've got no idea what that stands for. I appreciated that. It kind of helps it all ride out in context. And it's also obvious why you want to be able to use acronyms and actually move your conversation along. And I also had wanted to make a comment along the lines of what Rich was just checking into. It sounded like from what you said that our non-public placements have basically been cut in half over recent years, which I think is a tremendous accomplishment. It really, it means that we are very effectively increasing our capacity to deliver FAPE, and which is free and appropriate public education to all of our students. The core of what we're after, of course, is to provide the right appropriate service to every student we possibly can. And there are going to be certain circumstances where there is specific niche expertise and resources available in some non-public setting with which we just can't feasibly compete against. And it's going to be the best outcome for the student to take advantage of what's been painstakingly set up outside the public schools rather than the best the public schools can do to compete against it. But the fact that we are offering more and more of what works for more and more of our students is a tremendous testament to the work being done there. And another part of that is that at a bottom line level, being able to do more of the work in-house really is less expensive to the taxpayer at the end of the day. And it means that not only are we delivering what our special ed students need more and more, but we are not diverting as much additional resource from other classrooms as we would have to otherwise. So that's the kind of win-win we really want. And so I definitely didn't want to let that slide by without comment. So it was overall a great presentation. Thank you.
I know that Dr. Williams is for good reason eager for us to wrap up, but I just do have to say that the fact that they have gotten so many kids back from private placements over the last 2 years really does need to be highlighted. I mean, they've opened up 2 programs, mostly during a pandemic. Families are choosing them, and kids who had to move away from home to get an education, who didn't get to stay in their own communities, are now in their own communities in a more quality program, building relationships with people around them, doing internships at places where they can work after they leave us. During the pandemic, Ilya was the district, of all the administrators district-wide, Ilya was the one who got the least vacation time of everybody. And she and her team were tireless in the supports that they provided to kids. And at the board level, it was pretty much crickets from our SPED families because of the work that they were doing to keep the wheels turning and to keep our SPED kids engaged. And I'm just, we can always do better, and we'll get you some information that you definitely need and should have. But I'm just so grateful for this team and what they've done for our kids. So.
Okay, we return to action items and move down the home stretch. 15.4 is approval of the 9th grade math placement. Long time no see, Bonnie.
Hello. And for this item, we have got Diana Wilmot joining us. Diana, tell us about our math placements and our English placements. We do this annually. We're back again, but I will let Diana take it from here.
Hi there. How are you? Nice to see everybody.
Awesome. Oh, and good to see you too.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me tonight and talk about our placement for math and English language arts. It came up suddenly, so but I'm ready. So we do this every year. We talk about our efforts to make sure that students are placed appropriately at the beginning of the year, make sure all kids are placed in classes and have the necessary supports that they need. We use our English language arts placement chart from this for the feeder schools coming in, and then the math placement chart we use to figure out if kids are which math class they're going to go into. There were some changes to the placement chart last year that were positive and had both the impact of the pandemic and knowing that kids were coming from their homes, some of them testing at home and then testing again. So there were some tweaks that needed to be made, both, from testing in January to testing in May to maybe testing again in the summer school and then again when they started at the fall. So we waited a little bit longer to present, I think, than we normally would have. But I can say that students have been properly placed and have made all the necessary calls and checks to our counselors, and our students are properly placed in English language arts and math. Those are the 2 items.
Diana, could you speak a little bit to how many kids were moved from one English class to another and the directions in which they were moved?
Yeah, I believe it was something like 22, I reviewed 22 students. And sorry, I'm just going to bring it up. My apologies. In the board item, I wrote it out, how many students I reviewed. In the end, I know for, are we talking about English language arts or math first? Does it
ELA,
matter?
please.
ELA, okay. My apologies. I was just bringing up the book agenda. I was so engaged in listening to that special education.
22 were reviewed.
22 were reviewed, and I believe it was, everybody was placed appropriately. So I have, how many were moved in or down or up? It was something like, I should rattle off the number exactly as the paragraph reads. My apologies, Bonnie. But I do know that any placements of movement were due to parent choice, moving the student to a level down.
We were concerned that there might be a lot of movement because for the most part, students took these tests for placement on their own at home. And we were very pleased that there was so little movement of it. And there was as much movement. I think there was more movement up than there was anything else. All of these are done with parent consent. Now with us not having algebra readiness, students would be placed into algebra based on the class they had the year before or higher. And we are actually this year doing a review of our literacy program and our English supports and their effectiveness. And we may be looking at some changes for that for the following year. So stay tuned on that front. But like Diana said, when she started, we've checked, everybody's where they're supposed to be. Everybody's got a waiver from a parent if a movement was made, and there were not many movements made.
Bonnie, is it fair to say at this point that at least in math, the rubric represents a guarantee of a floor, that basically every student will be placed at least at the level that, you know, that they should by
Every kid will start in our district in a UCA through G approved math class.
and that with the math project and everything else, we've opened up more opportunities for greater advancement.
Absolutely. And we will be back in December with a report on that for you guys.
So to me, I mean, in general, the equity guarantee rubrics that we, you know, that was very much driven in math, and
Yep.
then we put the equivalent in place in English. They have been kind of the baseline upon which we've been building our equity efforts, and that essentially within the normal operations of the district, students are guaranteed at least that guarantee of equity or better.
I don't know if I would go that far, but I do think, and I don't know that we've only been building on academics, but I think we're in a way better place than we were 4 years ago. I don't know that you're wrong. I just need to think about it and look at some data to decide if we're in a much better place than we were in providing equity.
But and I just wanted to say, one of the things the Mathematics Placement Act of 2015 ensures is that students are not repeating their eighth grade math course, you know, through subjective measures. So one of the areas that we really focus on and making sure that kids aren't necessarily replicating over and over the same math course content. So our math placement chart did take into account the student's course that they were enrolled in. And instead of doing a placement test, we did a readiness test for our math initiative. That was very successful. We were able to still identify students who are in need of support. But it was not about, boxing them into a course that wasn't A through G eligible. So
Go ahead. Sorry, Diana.
no, I just wanted to acknowledge that. I mean, I looked at every student to make sure that, if they were in, even the students who were repeating geometry from 8th grade to 9th grade, that there was an approval, and that's what parents were requesting.
I struggle with your question about equity in academics because I think we're in a much better place than we used to be. But we still have higher numbers of students from certain partner districts starting math at higher levels. So there's still equity, I don't know, and then anyways, it's complicated.
I mean, to me, the key sense of all of this is opportunity and support.
Yeah.
And that we are ensuring that we are not shortchanging any student on the level of opportunity that they're prepared to be successful at. And we are not shortchanging any student on providing the kind of support to make them or to let them be successful at that level.
Yeah, I think that what we have done in many cases is that we have raised our expectations and put in supports to help kids meet those expectations. So instead of, we saw it with our science change, right? We stopped having kids take advanced integrated science at the freshman year, for which they did not get UCA through G credit. And we had everybody go into biology or physics, depending on the high school you attended. And we had 107 more kids district-wide who were supposed to go into AIS based on their previous year science, who got a C or better and met a UCA through G requirement in their biology or physics class. And we did not see a higher rate of failure in the freshman class in science by making that change. So that's a really good example of where we put them in the game. We said, we're not going to have you keep practicing your shots, but never playing basketball. We're going to put you in the game and we're going to coach you to help reach those expectations and get there. And that's great work.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this whole bundle is really one of the most exciting areas of work that we have been doing. And it goes back, I'm always reminded of a time, Bonnie, that you stood in front of the board and said, board, you talk about wanting to be bold. This is how you go about being bold. And we're seeing it, reflected across our incoming 9th grade classes and the opportunities that they are getting in much greater numbers and the success that's being engendered.
Thank you.
This is what we've been after. So to me, I mean, the fact that we have these rubrics, again, this is at this point, it is a compliance baseline that we've been living with great fidelity for a number of years. But we've got a great structure built on top of it so that this is almost now an afterthought. It's a good way to check that we're not screwing up anywhere.
Right.
But what we're doing is a lot more than what these safeguards represent.
I totally agree with that.
And so seeing how much fidelity there is to the safeguards is just kind of reassuring of, okay, we're built on a solid foundation. So I'm really pleased to see that. I've monopolized this. Other board member comments or concerns? All right. These are there any public comments, questions on this one before I move on and ask for action? These are two different approval items, although we've discussed them together. So let's do them one at a time for approval. And I'll be eager to have a motion of approval for the math placement.
So moved.
Second.
All right.
I heard Shawnee's second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, who is eager to move approval for the English placement verification?
Somebody else. Come on. So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you for not firing me when I suggested doing something bold.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Oh, look at this. We're in danger of not having to ask to extend the meeting beyond 10 o'clock. Let us talk about future agenda items. And there's one comment I wanted to throw in here that I hope will become a little bit of future discussion. I think in almost every topic we touched on tonight, we talked about the extraordinary effort that members of our staff have put in, and the focus, the extra time, the going the extra mile, one thing and another. And something we hear about continuously is everybody's worked and worked and worked, and they are very tired and they are very stressed. I think it would be very appropriate and valuable for this board to consider putting together some sort of a resolution recommending that our district go through a deep shutdown this winter break, and that beyond making available the services that our community members need from us during the break, that our faculty and staff do not have carryover responsibilities through the break, and that our students do not have carryover academic responsibilities through the break. And that this is one board member's suggestion for a topic of discussion. If there are other board members.
Similar, but maybe slightly more broad. Thank you. I'm not used to this yet. Our student trustees have talked about stress for students. I've heard bathrooms, I've heard homework. One of our presenters asked a rhetorical question: what is causing trauma? There's probably a number of things that, there's pressure, and one way to relieve pressure is hire additional people to shoulder more of the burden, but there are perhaps other ways. A deep shutdown over winter break is a possibility. I made aware from a friend at Crystal Springs that they have every whatever 8th weekend is like 0 work over that weekend, or something along those lines. There may be other ideas. I'm not married to any one particular idea or any particular ideas, but I think looking at different ways that we can reduce stress or give some amount of relief to our students and to our staff, that would be acknowledgement of all the hard work and acknowledgement of the mental health issues or mental health stress. Whatever those are would be what I would propose as a topic, Alan. So slightly more broad, but it would include what you're saying. That was one of my items as well.
Actually I'll bring up some of the things that I've been doing over the last couple of weeks, just getting to know our school a little bit more and kind of what's happening. I think there are some things we can do around mental health. It may not be hiring more staff, but because we are in a crisis, I think we need to think of ourselves as FEMA and say exactly what we need for a short amount of time. That's a quick fix that preserves our mental health counselors and academic counselors. For the kids, you really don't want to go to someone else who you don't know, but maybe there's something else that they can do. You can come in like a call center and just be there for a couple of hours, triaging kids or triaging adults who are struggling, right? I think we have to start thinking way outside the box. As I think about, and I'm not talking about traditional mental health talk therapy, but just also well-being. And thinking about my own family, just having to rethink what that looks like for us, because we are coming out of a crisis, but we're in this transition phase where you still need support. We're not back normal. And so I want
for us to think about what are some Band-Aids we can do for short term to preserve our teachers, particularly, because I heard the students, that was really important to me to hear. Our teachers are tired and they are the tools for high quality education. But our students, there's probably some synergy happening there, right? Where teachers are feeling what students are feeling, and so no one's naming it, and so there's some synergy there. So I would love for us to put that in the context of that, but looking at it from an emergency perspective.
All right, Superintendent, does it feel like you've gotten a good sense of what the board would like to talk about? So I don't want to, Trustee C, I know you've got something to contribute, so I'll let you in just a second. I don't want to actually have the discussion now because it's not agendized, but I think we have a sense of what we would like to agendize. And yeah, please.
Thank you. And so to kind of avoid discussing it, but I think this is a really great point, and something I'd love to discuss further. And I think there are a lot of like pitfalls that can come up with even trying to find ways to reduce stress. So like those are things that we'll really need to be quite intentional about. And obviously you want to work to reduce stress, but do that in an intentional and meaningful way, as kind of more to prevent it just from being an empty gesture of like, oh, this is what we're doing, is your stress reduced, but to actually really like follow up on it. And so I think that we should really keep that in mind when we move forward and have these conversations. And Carlos also wants to say something.
Yes. So last meeting, I kind of made an address to the students directly, and I said that Isabel and I are here to represent them, and represent them we will. At SAC yesterday, we heard from a student who wanted us to keep in mind something that they referred to as cultural competence, which is a very complex subject, and we only heard really just a few minutes of it, and I'm fascinated to hear more about it and more points of view about it. But when talking about something as complex as mental health and the ways a district can work to support students when it comes to mental health, I think that's something really important we need to keep in mind, that that aspect of cultural competence, it's not so widely accepted in every culture, for better or for worse, that mental health is something we can talk about and something that we can actively keep an open dialogue about. So not to drag things out further, but I do think that that's something that unfortunately does fall behind sometimes when it comes to planning these kinds of things and talking about these kinds of things.
Absolutely. And in response to the trustees, we will make recommendations, because I would think it would require convening groups of folk to get input, so that, as you say, to not just say this is what we're going to do, but actually survey folk and see where they are and what's causing some of the stress outside of the obvious. And so we are concerned about our workforce. We're concerned about our students, and we're also concerned about getting to the end of the year successfully with everyone whole and also respected. And we will find ways to work through it together. So thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Yes.
The two requests I have happen to correspond to 2 points that Edith, the SCPA president, raised. And one is about substitute shortage. And I just don't have an awareness of the comments there and comment email we've received from others about the issue and how we're able to respond to it. That would be helpful in some form, I think. And the other thing she raised was about English learners, where I think her focus was on immediate needs that might be tied to the larger report that I know we talked about here anticipating, but I think we haven't heard about how the tri-district collaboration with Stanford and the work to support English learners is going on. So that's something I hope we can schedule
I support both of those topics. I see Rich nodding at least.
I think what she was referring to, we have, students that have been seeking asylum arriving at our schools. And that's something we've never talked about, like what support we give. So it's a little bit more narrow than the whole English language learner topic and our collaboration with Stanford. So I believe that's what she was talking about, and that's what I've heard is a huge issue at our sites. So I'd like it to be a little bit more narrow, because that's what types of support, trauma-informed supports are we giving kids that we know have been through trauma and they're arriving at our campus.
Yeah, President Sarver. Sorry, I'm just doing a time check. We're now over. time.
Okay. Well, we didn't get out the door at 10 o'clock. So would anybody like to continue for another few minutes until we wrap up? I'll accept a motion. Rich would like to continue. Would anybody? Oh,
Shawnee's second.
Okay. And Shawnee's seconds. All those in favor of continuing until closure? Okay. We're going to plow through.
Okay, so just a refresher, the three of us were on I think it was a county Zoom, and we met with a community college district trustee, and then we discussed the idea of doing like what we call a 2x2. We decided that we didn't want something that formal, but he contacted me again and asked about a single meeting, not having an ongoing thing, but a single meeting. And I see it could go two different ways. It could be superintendent with two board members meeting with two of their board members and their, I guess, chancellor and president, or we invite them to come to one of our meetings and have a sharing of information. That's already scheduled. I guess he just didn't know that. Okay, so their trustee didn't know that and reached out to me, and I didn't know that. So I can get back to him if you have some details of a date or
Yes,
whatever.
it's in our Friday update. I've been working with Dr. Lopez. And so, no, it's not a date yet, but we'll get you the date. So she has to share it with her trustees. And so I will keep you abreast.
And I can share with them that it's in process and he can talk to Dr. Lopez.
Yes. Thank you.
I just want to be clear that we've all had several calls from the college district. And I just want to make sure we're saying the same consistent messages, because we're not able to, talk freely because of the Brown Act. I do think we need to push that through our superintendent, because I know I've gotten 2 or 3 calls regarding getting a meeting and different ways. I know Bonnie has met with them because of their inquiry at the beginning, inquiry at the beginning of the year. Shawnee's not knowing what to do, which is no problem. I've been sent an email, but I just want to be clear, like there's a process. Something to put on the agenda, and I don't know if it's the right timing yet, but to begin to think about our language and how we talk about kids or describe kids. I love how Bonnie used our partner district. I know that we did some changes, some in the resolution, but I'm just wondering how we can have a clearer conversation. I know Rich and I had talked about this a little bit more. What are the top 10 words that always come up when we're talking about kids, and how do we really, not kids, see, that's one of them. Students, sorry, student trustees, sorry. It's the mama in me. So I am also trying to change my language. And it's, some things are a little bit more difficult because I'm in a formal state right now, but I would love for us to come up like, the top 10 ways we talk about certain students because of the federal regulation and things of that sort. We get reports. How can we talk about them that would respect their learning, respect who they are? So it's just something that came up for me.
No, I would think that touching on this kind of language is going to be part of or something that can be touched on as part of the trainings that we've got coming up. I think that is one of the areas of respect and sensitivity that would be part of what we're going to touch on.
Yeah, but I think that's something we can, if there's a direction or somewhere where we can actually talk about specific terms. So even though we're waiting for a training, at least I know this is how I'm gonna talk about, instead of disabilities, those with different abilities, like just certain terms really quick, the top 10 until we get our training. But until then, we're going to use certain language when we talk about students or how we talk about students. I don't know. So that was the only thing that was on my mind for our agenda items.
Have we heard from everybody? I think that might be as interesting as perhaps the superintendent could kind of collect input from various board members and staff members of, you know, what are a handful of phrases you've heard dropped around board meetings that just kind of made you cringe, that would be worth talking about, and it would be completely independent of whose lips it came out of, but just here's something to be sensitive to that someone wasn't at some point.
I will work with our team to propose a response to what you're requesting.
Yeah, I won't go shooting off the top. Okay, if everybody's had their shot at input, let's say we were very close to 10 and call it almost successful. Shanice, you've got one more item.
I wanted to let you all know that I met with the student trustees. Thank you all for meeting with me. We have really good student trustees. We keep getting them good every year, so I'm excited that I met with both of you all. I really appreciate it. On November 1st, we're going to have our first town hall at Tide Academy. Am I correct? So people will be hearing more about that. Had the honor of going, all of us went to the EPAA moving forward. And then I just wanted to let you all know that I visited the Zen Den at Menlo Atherton, which is basically they have, as an innovative response, have created this room where students can just drop in, whether you have an IEP, a 504 plan, or just if you just want to take a break. I think Trustee Steve talked about this room as B22. It's a beautiful concept. And they've had over 400 kids drop into that center for different reasons with a pass and things of that sort. So I just want to let you guys know there's some innovation out there. So thank you.
Yes, and that reminds me, I know we have, the board has all received a special invitation to attend the MA homecoming game. And I know that at least several board members are planning to take up that offer, and superintendent will be there. So we'll look to another reunion Friday evening. So with that, we say go Bears and go Giants. And I'll be happy to hear a motion for adjournment.
I move us to adjournment.
All right, all those in favor, stand up and walk out.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.